If you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage to tell you the truth, even if it costs me the only person I've ever truly loved. Naomi stared at the message on her phone, her thumb trembling above the screen. It had arrived just 30 seconds after she walked away from the small suburban house where she'd seen the man she planned to marry cradling a baby she never knew existed. Her vision blurred, her chest tightened, but she couldn't bring herself to open it, because no message, no matter how heartfelt, could erase the image burned into her memory. Ethan, rocking a sleeping infant, smiling with a tenderness she'd always believed belonged only to their future together. In that single moment, 7 years of trust collapsed beneath the weight of one silent assumption. What Naomi didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that the story she believed she had just witnessed wasn't the story at all. And by the time the truth finally reached her, she would have to decide whether love could survive, not just a lie, but the ghosts of her own past. Before we begin today's unforgettable story, let me ask you something. Have you ever been absolutely certain someone betrayed you, only to discover later that your own fears had filled in the blanks? Sometimes the deepest heartbreak isn't caused by what someone did. It's caused by what we believed before giving them the chance to explain. Today's story is about trust, childhood wounds that refuse to stay buried, the dangerous power of assumptions, and a tiny baby who unknowingly changed the lives of two people forever. If you enjoy emotional love stories with powerful life lessons that stay with you long after the video ends, you're in the right place. Welcome to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, where every story reminds us that love isn't just about finding the right person, it's about becoming the right person. If you're new here, we'd love to have you as part of our family. Take a moment to subscribe, turn on notifications, and if stories about love, forgiveness, and second chances inspire you, leave a like. It really helps the channel reach more people who need these messages. Now, take a deep breath, because the letter Ethan wrote that day was never supposed to be read, and the truth inside it would force Naomi to question everything she thought she knew about love, betrayal, and the memories that had quietly controlled her heart for years. Let's begin. The message sat unopened on Naomi Brooks's phone for nearly an hour. She had driven aimlessly after leaving the quiet neighborhood where she'd seen Ethan holding the baby, eventually pulling into the far corner of a grocery store parking lot 20 miles away. The evening sky had begun to fade from soft blue into streaks of orange and purple, but she barely noticed. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, cold despite the warmth trapped inside the car. The notification still glowed on the screen. From Ethan. Please read this when you're ready. Nothing more. No explanation, no desperate apology, no frantic string of texts trying to convince her she'd misunderstood. Just one sentence. She stared at it until the screen dimmed, then locked itself. Her finger hovered over the power button. Instead of opening the message, she slipped the phone into the passenger seat. She wasn't ready. Not because she feared what Ethan might say, but because she feared what she already believed. Some truths didn't arrive all at once. They crept into your life quietly, disguising themselves as memories. For Naomi, that story had begun more than 20 years earlier. She was 9 years old when she learned that promises could disappear just as easily as people. Their apartment in Columbus, Ohio, wasn't much to look at. The carpet had faded from years of footsteps, the kitchen faucet dripped through every meal, and winter winds always seemed to find a crack around the windows. Yet to Naomi, it was home because it held the people she loved most, her mother, Denise, and her father, Marcus. At least, that's what she'd believed. Her father had always been the fun one. He built blanket forts in the living room. He danced while making pancakes on Saturday mornings. He could turn a trip to the grocery store into an adventure by pretending every aisle was a different country. Whenever Naomi scraped her knees, Marcus was the first to kneel beside her. "Scars," he'd say with a grin, "are proof you're brave enough to keep living." She believed every word that came from him. Children usually do. Then, one Thursday evening, everything changed. Naomi remembered sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, coloring a picture of their family. Her father wore an oversized blue tie because she'd always thought ties made people look important. Her mother held a sunflower. Naomi stood between them, smiling wider than either adult. She'd just finished coloring the sky when voices drifted from the kitchen. At first they were quiet, then louder, then sharp. She couldn't understand every word. Only fragments. "Can't keep doing this. It's not that simple. There's someone else." The crayons slipped from her fingers. She walked toward the hallway, her small feet silent against the worn carpet. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop. She just wanted to know why her parents sounded different. Adults always said children didn't notice things. They were wrong. Children noticed everything, especially the things adults wished they didn't. From the hallway she saw her mother standing beside the sink, tears streaming down her face. Her father stood near the back door with a duffel bag resting beside his feet. Naomi frowned. Are we going somewhere? Both adults turned. For a brief second, Marcus smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind people wear when they're trying to hide that their heart is breaking. He walked over, knelt in front of Naomi, and brushed a loose curl away from her forehead. Pumpkin, he whispered. Daddy has to leave for work for a little while. For how long? He hesitated. Not long. She accepted the answer because she had no reason not to. Will you still come to my school play next Friday? His eyes watered. I'll do everything I can. Naomi wrapped her tiny arms around his neck. He hugged her so tightly she giggled. When he finally stood, he picked up the duffel bag. At the door he looked back one last time. I love you more than anything. I love you too. The door closed. Naomi waited by the window. She watched his car disappear around the corner. She kept waiting. Friday came. Then another Friday. Then Christmas. Then her 10th birthday. Her father never came home. Months later, she accidentally overheard two neighbors talking outside the apartment building. They say Marcus started another family across town. Already? Has a baby now. Naomi didn't understand everything they meant, but she understood enough. Her father hadn't left because of work. He'd left because he'd chosen someone else. From that day forward, every business trip, every cancelled plan, every unexplained absence, meant only one thing to her. Someone was leaving. Years passed. Naomi learned how to survive disappointment. She excelled in school, not because she loved homework, but because achievements felt dependable in a way people sometimes weren't. She studied hard enough to earn scholarships. She volunteered at children's hospitals during college. Eventually she became a pediatric occupational therapist, a career she loved because helping children rebuild confidence after illness or injury reminded her that healing was possible. Even broken things could become strong again, at least physically. Emotionally, healing was slower, sometimes invisible. Her patients often trusted her within days. Adults rarely did, and Naomi rarely trusted adults in return. Her friends joked that she had impossibly high standards. She smiled whenever they said it. The truth was more complicated. She didn't expect perfection. She expected consistency. If someone promised to call, call. If someone promised to come, come. If someone promised forever, mean it. It wasn't asking for too much. It was asking for honesty. Then, 7 years before that evening in the parking lot, she met Ethan Carter. Not at a party. Not through dating apps. Not because fate dramatically pushed them together. They met because of spilled coffee. Naomi had been rushing into a neighborhood bookstore on a rainy Saturday morning, balancing an umbrella, a laptop bag, and a paper cup that was far too full. Someone opened the door from inside at exactly the wrong moment. She collided with him. Coffee splashed across both of them. Oh my goodness! She gasped. I'm so sorry. The tall stranger looked down at his soaked shirt. For one awkward second, neither of them spoke. Then he laughed. Not the forced laugh people use to avoid embarrassment. A genuine, warm laugh that echoed through the entrance. Well, he said, I guess that's one way to introduce yourself. Naomi couldn't help smiling. I'm buying you another shirt. I think a napkin is a cheaper solution. She laughed. The tension disappeared. He held the door open. Ladies first. Even coffee criminals? Especially coffee criminals. Inside the bookstore, they spent nearly 30 minutes talking while waiting for the rain to ease. They discovered they both loved historical biographies. Both hated reality television. Both preferred quiet evenings over loud parties. When Ethan finally stood to leave, he hesitated. I know this is usually the part where someone says, we should do this again sometime. Naomi smiled cautiously. And? I don't like vague plans. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. What if I ask whether you're free Thursday at 6 instead? She blinked. Specific. No games. No pretending. No uncertainty. For reasons she couldn't explain. That mattered. She accepted. And for the first time, in a very long time, hope felt a little less frightening. Thursday arrived exactly the way Ethan had promised it would. At 5:58 p.m., Naomi glanced through the restaurant window and spotted his silver SUV pulling into the parking lot. He parked carefully, stepped out, straightened the sleeves of his navy button-down shirt, and checked his watch before walking toward the entrance. 2 minutes early. She smiled to herself. It was such a small thing that most people would have overlooked it. But to Naomi, it mattered. Promises weren't measured only by grand gestures. They were measured in ordinary moments, showing up when you said you would, remembering the little things, proving through actions that your words meant something. Ethan entered the restaurant carrying a single sunflower. I'm not sure if bringing flowers on a first date is old-fashioned, he said with a sheepish grin. But the florist told me sunflowers make people smile. Naomi looked down at the bright yellow bloom. My mom loves sunflowers. Really? She says they always face the light, no matter where the sun moves. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. I like that. She accepted the flower. For reasons she couldn't explain, it felt less like receiving a gift and more like receiving reassurance. The months that followed weren't filled with extravagant vacations or dramatic declarations of love. Instead, they were built from ordinary days. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, late-night phone calls after exhausting workdays, Sunday walks through neighborhood parks, cooking dinner together while laughing over recipes that rarely turned out the way they expected. Ethan wasn't perfect. Neither was Naomi. But they learned each other's rhythms. He discovered she couldn't function without coffee before 8 in the morning. She discovered he hummed quietly whenever he concentrated. He always remembered her patients' names, even though he'd never met them. She learned he called his mother every Wednesday evening without fail. Neither of them rushed the relationship. It unfolded naturally, like two people slowly learning to trust the quiet comfort of each other's presence. For Naomi, that was something entirely new. She had spent years believing love had to be earned through perfection. Ethan gently challenged that belief. You don't always have to be strong, he told her one evening after she'd had a difficult day at the clinic. I know. No, he replied softly. I don't think you do. She looked at him. You apologize whenever you're upset. I don't want to be a burden. He reached across the couch and took her hand. Needing someone isn't being a burden. Those words stayed with her. As the years passed, their lives intertwined almost effortlessly. Naomi became close to Ethan's mother, Margaret, who welcomed her with the warmth of someone who had always hoped for another daughter. Holiday dinners became traditions. Birthdays became celebrations shared with both families. Friends began referring to them as the steady couple. The couple everyone assumed would last forever. When Ethan proposed during a quiet weekend hike overlooking a lake in northern Michigan, there were no hidden photographers or elaborate surprises. Just the two of them. The breeze. The sound of water against the rocks. And one simple question. I don't want a perfect life, Ethan had said. I just want one where you're beside me. Naomi had cried before she managed to answer. Yes. It felt like the beginning of everything she'd once believed she'd never have. Nearly a year later, wedding planning filled their weekends. Not because Naomi dreamed of an extravagant ceremony, but because both of them wanted something meaningful. They debated venues, compared invitation designs, argued playfully over whether the reception playlist needed more classic soul music or modern pop. One evening, they found themselves sitting on the living room floor surrounded by magazines, fabric samples, and unopened envelopes. Ethan picked up a seating chart. I have one request. Naomi looked up. What? No chicken dance. She laughed so hard she nearly spilled her tea. I wasn't planning one. I just needed reassurance. She leaned against his shoulder. I can't believe we're actually doing this. Me neither. You sound nervous. I am. She raised an eyebrow. About getting married? No. He smiled. I'm nervous because I finally found something worth protecting. She kissed his cheek. You don't have to protect us by yourself. He smiled. I know, but something about the way he said it made Naomi wonder if he truly believed those words. As spring turned into summer, Ethan's work became increasingly demanding. As a civil engineer specializing in bridge restoration, he often traveled to inspect aging infrastructure across different states. Business trips weren't unusual. They had always been part of his career. Sometimes he was gone for 3 days, sometimes a week. Naomi had never questioned them. Until recently, it began with little things. One evening, while they were watching a movie, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. His relaxed expression changed almost instantly. Not panic, not guilt, something closer to concern. I need to take this, he said. Work? He hesitated for barely a second. Yeah. He stepped onto the balcony before answering. Naomi couldn't hear the conversation. She wasn't trying to listen. Still, she noticed how quietly he spoke. When he returned, 20 minutes later, he apologized. Sorry. Everything okay? He forced a smile. Just a project delay. She accepted the explanation. At least, she tried to. A few weeks later, another moment unsettled her. They were having breakfast before work when Ethan received another notification. His phone lit up briefly. She wasn't trying to invade his privacy. She simply happened to glance in its direction. She caught only 3 words before the screen disappeared. Hearing confirmed Monday. Ethan quickly picked up the phone, locked it, turned it face down. You okay? Naomi asked. He nodded almost too quickly. Just work. She frowned. A hearing? He blinked. Contract meeting. Oh. His explanation sounded reasonable, but something about the pause before answering lingered in her mind. The changes were subtle. He became more distracted. Sometimes he'd stare out the window without realizing she was talking. Other nights he'd wake before dawn and quietly leave the bedroom, returning half an hour later after pacing the living room. When she asked what was wrong, his answer never changed. "I'm just tired." She wanted to believe him. She truly did. But doubt has a strange way of growing. It rarely arrives all at once. It starts as a whisper, then becomes a question. Eventually, it becomes a story we tell ourselves. And Naomi had spent most of her life telling herself one particular story. A man says he's leaving for work. Then he leaves for something else. She hated that her mind kept returning to her father. Hated that memories from 25 years ago still had the power to shape her thoughts. One evening, while cleaning out an old storage box, she found the drawing she'd made as a child. The picture of her family, the oversized blue tie, her mother's sunflower, the smiling little girl standing between them. On the back, written in uneven handwriting, were the words her father had helped her spell. "Our family forever." Naomi traced the faded letters with trembling fingers. Forever. What a fragile word. 2 days later, Ethan packed another suitcase. "I'll only be gone until Tuesday," he said, folding a sweater into the bag. "Where this time?" "Indianapolis." "Bridge inspection?" "Yeah." She nodded. He zipped the suitcase shut, walked over, kissed her forehead. "I'll call every night." She smiled. "I know you will." He left before sunrise the next morning. Naomi stood at the front window with a cup of coffee, watching his SUV disappear down the street. For a long time, she remained there. Something didn't feel right. She couldn't explain it. There was no proof, no evidence, no unmistakable sign of betrayal, only a quiet ache, an old wound beginning to throb again. By lunchtime, she tried to focus on work, but her thoughts kept drifting. By evening, she replayed every recent conversation in her head, every hesitation, every late-night phone call, every guarded expression. At exactly 8:17 p.m., Ethan called. The connection was clear. His voice sounded warm, familiar. They talked for 15 minutes. He asked about her day. She asked about his hotel. Everything seemed normal, almost. When they hung up, she realized he had never mentioned the bridge. Not once. She looked at the calendar on the refrigerator. Then, at the drawing she'd found earlier. Finally, she reached for her car keys. Her heartbeat echoed in the quiet kitchen. "This is crazy," she whispered to herself. Maybe it was. Maybe she would drive to Indianapolis only to discover she had imagined everything. Maybe she'd laugh about it later. Maybe she'd apologize for ever doubting him. But another part of her, the frightened little girl who had once waited by a window for a father who never returned, couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. She took a deep breath, locked the front door, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She was going to follow Ethan. Before we continue to Chapter 2, let's pause for a moment. If you were in Naomi's position, what would you have done? Would you have trusted Ethan completely, or would you have followed him to find the truth for yourself? Leave your answer in the comments below. I read your comments every day, and I genuinely love to hear your perspective because every relationship is different, and your opinion could help someone else who is facing a similar situation. If this story has already touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson for more emotional love stories filled with powerful life lessons, second chances, and unforgettable endings. Your support helps this channel grow and allows us to keep bringing you stories that inspire, heal, and remind us what love is truly about. Now, Naomi has made a decision she can never take back. She believes she's searching for the truth, but what she's about to discover will shatter everything she thought she knew about the man she loves. Let's continue with Chapter 2. Naomi barely slept. She had set 3 alarms, but she was already awake before the first one sounded. The digital clock on her nightstand read 4:47 a.m. The house felt strangely empty. Ethan had left before sunrise the previous morning, yet his presence lingered everywhere. His favorite coffee mug rested upside down on the drying rack. His jacket still hung beside the front door because he'd forgotten it in the rush to leave. A novel he had been reading sat open on the coffee table, a receipt tucked between the pages as a bookmark. Everything looked normal. Everything looked like the home of 2 people planning a wedding. And yet, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that she no longer understood the man she loved. She walked into the kitchen and started the coffee maker. As it hummed to life, she caught her reflection in the dark microwave door. "You've lost your mind," she whispered. Following someone you loved wasn't romantic. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't something she had ever imagined herself doing. She had spent years telling friends that trust was the foundation of every relationship. Now she was preparing to drive hundreds of miles because she wasn't sure she believed her own fiancé. She hated what suspicion had turned her into, but another voice answered inside her. What if you're right? That question was impossible to silence. By 7 o'clock, Naomi had packed a small overnight bag. Not because she planned to confront Ethan. She hadn't thought that far ahead. She simply needed to know the truth. Whatever it was. The interstate stretched ahead beneath a pale morning sky as she left Columbus behind. Traffic was light. Country music played softly through the speakers, but she wasn't listening. Her thoughts were louder than any song. She remembered something her mother used to say whenever life became confusing. Fear tells us stories. Wisdom asks for facts. At the time, Naomi had thought it sounded like one of those comforting sayings adults repeated because they didn't have real answers. Now, years later, she wondered if her mother had been trying to protect her from exactly this kind of moment. Because fear was certainly telling her a story. A story in which Ethan had another family. A story in which every late-night phone call suddenly made sense. A story in which every business trip had been a lie. But were those facts? Or were they echoes of a frightened little girl who had watched her father disappear? She tightened her grip on the steering wheel. I just need the truth, she said aloud. The empty car offered no reply. Around noon, Ethan called. Her heart skipped. She considered ignoring it. Instead, she answered. Hey, he said warmly. How's your day? It's busy. I'm grabbing lunch between meetings. Meetings. The word lingered. What did you have? He laughed. A terrible gas station sandwich. I deserve better. She smiled, despite herself. You definitely do. For a few minutes, the conversation felt exactly like every other phone call they'd shared over the years. Comfortable. Natural. Easy. Then Ethan asked, Everything okay? You sound tired. She hesitated. I didn't sleep much. You've been working too hard. Maybe. Or maybe she'd spent the entire night wondering whether the man she loved had built another life without her. I'll make us dinner when I get home, he promised. You don't have to. I want to. There it was again. A promise. I should get back, he said. Love you. Naomi closed her eyes. I love you too. The call ended. For a long moment, she stared at the phone resting on the passenger seat. If he was lying, he was remarkably convincing. And somehow, that hurt even more. By late afternoon, she reached the outskirts of Indianapolis. Following Ethan wasn't as difficult as she'd feared. His company's GPS location occasionally appeared through the family-sharing feature they had enabled months earlier for emergencies. She had almost turned it off several times during wedding planning, insisting they didn't need it. Now she silently thanked the version of herself that hadn't. The blue dot wasn't at a construction site. It wasn't near a bridge. It wasn't even downtown. Instead, it rested in a quiet suburban neighborhood, lined with maple trees and neatly trimmed lawns. Naomi frowned. Maybe one of the engineers lived here. Maybe it was a client. Maybe there was a perfectly ordinary explanation. She parked half a block away. The neighborhood was peaceful. Children rode bicycles. A golden retriever chased a tennis ball across a front yard. Wind stirred the leaves overhead. Nothing about the place suggested scandal. Nothing matched the dramatic scenes her imagination had created during the drive. She almost laughed at herself. Maybe she'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe she would go home tonight and confess everything. Maybe Ethan would tease her for watching too many suspense movies. Then, a familiar silver SUV turned the corner. Her breath caught. Ethan parked in front of a modest white house with blue shutters. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look guilty. He looked tired. He sat behind the wheel for nearly a minute before taking a slow breath. Then he picked up a small gift bag from the passenger seat. Inside it, Naomi noticed a stuffed elephant with oversized ears. Her confusion deepened. Why would a bridge inspection require a child's toy? Ethan stepped out, walked to the front porch, and rang the bell. A woman in her 60s answered. She smiled warmly. Instead of shaking his hand, she embraced him. Naomi watched from a distance, unable to hear a single word. The older woman gently touched his shoulder before inviting him inside. The front door closed. Naomi remained frozen in her car. Her heartbeat echoed in the silence. She still didn't know what she was looking at. But every instinct told her that the answers she had come searching for were waiting inside that house. And for the first time since beginning the journey, she wasn't sure she wanted to find them. Naomi remained inside her car for several minutes after Ethan disappeared into the house. Her fingers tapped nervously against the steering wheel. Every instinct told her to drive away. This wasn't who she was. She wasn't someone who followed people or searched for secrets. She believed in conversations, honesty, and giving the people she loved the benefit of the doubt. So why was she still sitting there? Because another instinct, one born long before she met Ethan, kept whispering that if she left now, she'd spend the rest of her life wondering. She needed certainty. Not because she wanted to catch him doing something wrong. Because she desperately wanted to discover she'd been wrong all along. She stepped out of the car. The late afternoon breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming hydrangeas. The neighborhood was peaceful enough that every sound seemed amplified. A lawnmower hummed somewhere down the street. Children laughed from a nearby backyard. A wind chime gently clinked on the porch of the neighboring house. It felt like an ordinary day. Yet Naomi's pulse raced as though she were walking toward the most important moment of her life. She stayed on the opposite side of the street, careful not to draw attention to herself. The curtains in the White House were partly open. From where she stood, she could see only fragments of the living room. A bookshelf, a family portrait, a lamp beside an armchair. No Ethan. She swallowed hard. Maybe she should leave. Maybe this had already gone too far. Just as she turned to walk back toward her car, movement caught her eye. The older woman she'd seen earlier crossed the living room, carrying what looked like a diaper bag. A moment later, Ethan appeared. He wasn't wearing the confident smile Naomi knew so well. His shoulders looked heavy. His expression was tired. The older woman said something Naomi couldn't hear. Ethan nodded slowly. Then they both disappeared down a hallway that led deeper into the house. Curiosity overcame hesitation. Naomi carefully walked closer, staying behind a row of flowering shrubs that bordered the property. She wasn't trying to invade anyone's privacy. She only wanted one answer. Was the man she loved living a life she knew nothing about? She reached the side of the house. One window stood slightly open. White curtains moved gently with the breeze. From inside came a soft sound. A baby crying. Naomi froze. Her heartbeat became deafening. No, please, not this. The crying lasted only a few seconds before someone spoke in a voice she recognized immediately. It's okay. Ethan, I'm here. The crying softened. Naomi's legs suddenly felt weak. Slowly, almost unwillingly, she looked through the narrow opening between the curtains, and the world seemed to stop. A small nursery stretched before her. Sunlight poured through another window, bathing the room in warm afternoon light. Tiny clouds had been painted across pale blue walls. A wooden rocking chair sat beside a crib. Stuffed animals lined a nearby shelf. And there, sitting quietly in that rocking chair, was Ethan. He held a sleeping baby against his chest with extraordinary care. One hand gently supported the infant's tiny head. The other rested protectively across the baby's back. His eyes were closed. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't smiling. He simply rocked back and forth with slow, comforting movements. Then, after several silent moments, he kissed the baby's forehead. Naomi felt the air leave her lungs. The image before her was painfully beautiful, painfully intimate. It wasn't just that he was holding a baby. It was the tenderness, the familiarity, the instinctive way the infant settled peacefully against him. As if this wasn't the first time. As if this was routine. As if they belonged together. Without realizing it, Naomi covered her mouth to stop herself from making a sound. Tears filled her eyes. Everything inside her began connecting dots that might not even belong together. The business trips, the mysterious phone calls, the hidden messages, the emotional distance, the gift bag with the stuffed elephant, her father's promise. Daddy has to leave for work for a little while. Those exact words echoed through her memory. Work, always work, until she learned work had never been the reason. Her vision blurred. No, not again. Inside the nursery, the older woman quietly entered, carrying a small baby bottle. She handed it to Ethan. He thanked her with a grateful smile. The woman gently touched his shoulder before leaving the room. Ethan adjusted the baby in his arms with remarkable confidence. Naomi watched every movement. This wasn't someone awkwardly holding an infant for the first time. He knew exactly how to support the baby's neck, how to soothe the tiny cries, how to whisper softly enough that the child immediately relaxed. 1,000 painful questions flooded Naomi's mind. How long? Who was the baby's mother? How could he keep something this enormous hidden from her? How could they be planning a wedding while another child waited here? She wanted to burst through the front door. She wanted to demand answers. She wanted to scream. Instead, she stood perfectly still. Sometimes heartbreak doesn't arrive like an explosion. Sometimes it settles quietly over your shoulders until you can barely breathe. After several minutes, Ethan stood. He carefully placed the baby into the crib. The infant stirred briefly before drifting back to sleep. Ethan smiled, a soft, exhausted smile Naomi had rarely seen. It wasn't the smile of a man celebrating a secret. It was the smile of someone carrying an enormous weight. But Naomi couldn't see that. All she could see was a future she thought belonged to them. A nursery, a baby, a family. She had imagined those moments countless times. Now she believed someone else had lived them first. She stepped backward, one careful step, then another. Tears streamed silently down her face. She reached her car without remembering how she'd crossed the street. Once inside, she locked the doors. Her hands shook so violently, she dropped her keys onto the floor. She couldn't stop crying. She wasn't crying because she'd seen another woman. She hadn't. She wasn't crying because she'd heard Ethan confess to anything. He hadn't. She was crying because the picture her mind had created felt complete. And complete stories are incredibly difficult to question. After several minutes, her phone vibrated. Ethan, calling. She stared at the screen. The ringing continued. She couldn't answer. Not yet. The call ended. Seconds later, another notification appeared. Ethan, hey, just checking on you. Call me when you can. I miss you. Naomi closed her eyes. The words felt cruel now. Not because she knew they were lies. Because she no longer knew what was true. She quietly slipped her engagement ring from her finger. Holding it tightly in her palm, she whispered through trembling lips, I can't do this. She started the engine. As the White House disappeared in her rearview mirror, Naomi believed she was driving away from the man she loved. She had no idea. She was also driving away from the truth. The drive back to Columbus felt longer than the journey to Indianapolis. Naomi barely remembered the miles she covered. The radio remained off. The GPS spoke occasionally, reminding her to merge or stay on the interstate. But its calm voice sounded distant, almost unreal. Every few minutes, she replayed the image in her mind. Ethan, the rocking chair, the sleeping baby, his gentle kiss on the child's forehead. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't replace that image with another explanation. By the time she reached home shortly after midnight, she was emotionally exhausted. She unlocked the front door and stepped into the quiet house. Everything looked exactly as she had left it. The framed engagement photo on the hallway table, the half-finished seating chart for their wedding, fabric samples spread across the dining room, a guest list with tiny checkmarks beside confirmed invitations. It looked like the home of a couple planning the happiest day of their lives. Naomi stood in the entryway for nearly a minute before quietly removing the engagement ring from her purse. She didn't put it back on. Instead, she laid it inside the small ceramic bowl where they usually left their keys. The soft clink echoed through the silent house. For the first time since Ethan proposed, her left hand felt strangely empty. She didn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, another memory surfaced. Not of Ethan. Of her father. She remembered waiting beside the living room window when she was 10 years old. Every afternoon after school, she would sit there for 15 minutes before starting her homework. Her mother never asked why. Perhaps she already knew. Children often wait much longer than adults realize. They wait for promises, for apologies, for impossible miracles. One rainy afternoon, Denise had finally knelt beside her. Sweetheart, she'd said gently, you don't have to keep waiting. Naomi had looked toward the window. What if he comes back today? Her mother's eyes filled with tears. If he wanted to come home, he already would have. Those words had shattered something inside her. She had promised herself she would never ignore warning signs again. Never become the woman who waited while someone else built another life. That promise now echoed louder than reason. Around 7 the next morning, her phone rang. Ethan. She stared at the screen until it stopped. Seconds later, another call came. Then another. Finally, a voicemail notification appeared. She hesitated before pressing play. Hey. Ethan's voice sounded tired. I've been trying to reach you. I know you're probably busy at the clinic, but I just wanted to hear your voice. He paused. If something's wrong, please tell me. Another pause. I'll be home tomorrow afternoon. His voice softened. I love you. The message ended. Naomi lowered the phone. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. He didn't sound like a man living a double life. He sounded worried, genuinely worried. But then, the image returned. The nursery. The baby. His arms wrapped protectively around the tiny child. Her heart hardened once more. At work, Naomi struggled to concentrate. She normally loved Mondays at the Pediatric Rehabilitation Center. Children had a remarkable ability to remind adults what resilience looked like. That morning, however, even their laughter couldn't quiet the storm inside her. One of her youngest patients, 6-year-old Ava, spent the session learning to button her sweater after recovering from surgery. Each attempt ended with tiny fingers fumbling the buttons. I can't do it, Ava sighed. Naomi knelt beside her. What do we always say? The little girl frowned in concentration. Mistakes help us learn. Naomi smiled. Exactly. Ava tried again. This time, she succeeded. Her face lit up with pride. You did it! Ava hugged her. My mommy says people only get stronger if they don't give up. Naomi hugged her back. Your mummy sounds very wise. But the words lingered long after the session ended. People only get stronger if they don't give up. Was she giving up too quickly, or was she finally protecting herself? She honestly didn't know anymore. That evening, her best friend, Carmen, stopped by with takeout after noticing Naomi had barely responded to messages all weekend. The two women had met during graduate school and had remained inseparable ever since. Carmen took one look at Naomi's face and frowned. What happened? Naomi hesitated. Then, everything spilled out. The business trips, the phone calls, the nursery, the baby, the tears she'd cried all the way home. When she finally finished, Carmen sat quietly for several seconds. Did you talk to him? Naomi shook her head. I saw enough. Did you? Naomi looked up sharply. What does that mean? It means... Carmen chose her words carefully. You saw something painful, but did you actually learn what it meant? What other explanation could there be? I don't know. Neither do I. Exactly. Naomi looked away. I couldn't stand there and ask questions. I understand. No, I don't think you do. Her voice cracked. My dad said he was leaving for work. Carmen reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. I know. And another family was waiting. I know. So, when I saw Ethan... She couldn't finish the sentence. Carmen spoke softly. Naomi, Ethan isn't your father. Silence filled the room. It wasn't an accusation. It was simply the truth, one Naomi wasn't ready to accept. Late the following afternoon, a familiar silver SUV pulled into the driveway. Naomi watched through the living room curtains. Ethan stepped out carrying his overnight bag. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles beneath his eyes. He paused before walking to the front door, almost as if gathering the courage to enter. When he unlocked it and stepped inside, he immediately smiled. Naomi? No answer. He set down his bag. Babe? She slowly walked into the hallway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan noticed her bare left hand. His smile faded. What happened? Naomi folded her arms across her chest. We need to talk. He nodded immediately. Okay. His calmness somehow hurt even more. She searched his face for guilt, for panic, for anything that matched the story she'd built in her mind. Instead, she saw only concern. Are you all right? He asked quietly. She laughed bitterly. That's what you're asking me? His brow furrowed. I don't understand. No. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't think I understand you anymore. Ethan took a cautious step forward. What happened while I was gone? Naomi looked directly into his eyes. I followed you. The color drained from his face. For the first time since he'd walked through the door, he looked truly shaken. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. The air between them felt impossibly heavy. Ethan's overnight bag slipped from his hand and landed softly on the hardwood floor. You followed me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Naomi nodded. I didn't want to. But you did. Because you gave me a reason. A painful silence settled over the room. Ethan lowered his eyes, rubbing the back of his neck, as though searching for the right words. What did you see? The question stunned her. Not because he asked it, because he already seemed to know the answer. Naomi felt tears welling up again. I saw you. She swallowed hard. I saw you holding a baby. The words echoed through the living room. Ethan closed his eyes. His shoulders sagged. For a moment, Naomi expected him to deny it, to explain, to finally tell her what had been happening. Instead, he simply stood there, silent, and to Naomi, that silence sounded exactly like guilt. You don't even have an explanation? She asked, her voice trembling. It's not that simple. She let out a hollow laugh. That's what people say when they're caught. No. He looked up. It's what people say when they don't know where to begin. Try. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The hesitation lasted only a few seconds, but for Naomi, it felt like confirmation. You told me you were inspecting bridges, she said quietly. You told me you were working. I was working. She stared at him in disbelief. So rocking a baby is part of bridge engineering now? His jaw tightened. I can't explain everything. Can't. She repeated the word slowly. Or won't. They're not the same thing. They are when you're planning to marry someone. Ethan looked toward the kitchen window, avoiding her eyes. I never wanted to hurt you. You already have. I know. No. Her voice cracked. I don't think you do. She pointed toward the dining room. Our wedding invitations are sitting right there. She pointed toward the hallway. Your clothes are still hanging in our closet. Then she placed a trembling hand against her chest. And I spent 7 years believing I knew the man I was going to marry. She shook her head. I don't know him anymore. Ethan finally met her eyes. If I tell you that what you think happened isn't what happened. Naomi interrupted him. Then tell me the truth. His lips parted. Nothing came out. He looked as though he were fighting a battle inside his own mind. Finally, he whispered, I can't. Those 2 words landed like stones. Naomi felt something inside her break. You can't. No. Why? I promised. To who? He remained silent. To the baby's mother? Silence. To another family? Silence. To your child? Silence. Every unanswered question became another brick in the wall growing between them. Naomi walked past him, into the kitchen. She needed distance, needed space to breathe. Ethan followed a few steps behind but stopped at the doorway. I know how this looks. She turned sharply. No, Ethan. You don't. If you did, you would have told me the truth months ago. I wanted to. But... He closed his eyes. I couldn't. Again, the same answer. Always another wall. Always another secret. Naomi remembered something one of her young patients had once said, after hiding a broken toy from his parents. The longer I waited, the scarier telling the truth became. Children understood honesty better than many adults, because children hadn't yet learned to dress fear in complicated excuses. She opened a cabinet and reached for a glass. Her hands were shaking so badly that it slipped from her fingers. Before it hit the floor, Ethan caught it. Instinct. The same dependable reflex she'd always admired. He carefully set the glass on the counter. I'm sorry, he said. She laughed through her tears. You keep apologizing without telling me what you're apologizing for. I'm sorry for hurting you. You should be. I'm sorry for making you doubt me. I don't doubt you anymore. His heart seemed to stop. I believe exactly what I saw. Minutes passed. The grandfather clock in the hallway quietly marked each second. Tick, tick, tick. Neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan walked into the living room and sat on the couch. He looked exhausted. Older, somehow. Naomi remained standing. I've always admired one thing about you, Ethan said softly. What? You never stopped fighting for the children you worked with. She frowned. What does that have to do with us? You tell parents healing takes patience. I do. You tell them not to judge progress by one difficult day. I do. And yet. He looked at her with sadness rather than anger. You're judging our entire relationship by one moment. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't one moment. It was. It was every late-night call. Every trip. Every secret. Every time you looked me in the eye and said you were working. Ethan lowered his head. She wasn't wrong. Even if his reasons had been different, his secrecy had still caused this pain. I wish I could undo it, he whispered. You can't. I know. Another silence. This one even heavier. Finally, Naomi walked toward the bedroom. Ethan? She stopped in the doorway without looking back. I think you should stay somewhere else tonight. His chest tightened. You want me to leave? I need room to think. He nodded slowly. I understand. She almost wished he would argue. Fight. Demand another chance. Instead, he respected her request, which somehow made leaving even more painful. Within 20 minutes, Ethan had packed another overnight bag. He paused beside the front door. Naomi. She remained in the hallway. If there's ever a day when I'm finally allowed to tell you everything. His voice caught. I hope you'll listen. She looked at him for the first time since asking him to leave. I've been listening for months. You just stopped talking. Ethan nodded sadly. Then he picked up his bag, opened the front door, and quietly walked into the night. The sound of the door closing echoed through the empty house. Naomi stood motionless. The silence that followed felt almost unbearable. She had imagined this confrontation 100 different ways during the drive home. None of those versions ended like this. There had been no shouting, no confession, no dramatic revelation. Only two people who loved each other, separated by words neither of them could say. Naomi slowly walked into the living room. Her eyes landed on the wedding binder resting on the coffee table. She opened it. Venue confirmations, cake designs, guest seating. A handwritten note Ethan had tucked inside weeks earlier. I can't wait to grow old with you. A tear landed on the page. She gently closed the binder. then reached for her phone. With trembling fingers, she opened the wedding planning app. Her thumb hovered over one option. Pause planning. After several seconds, she pressed it. A confirmation message appeared. Your wedding has been placed on hold. Naomi stared at the screen until it dimmed. For the first time since Ethan proposed, she wasn't planning a future. She was questioning whether they still had one. Rain fell steadily against the windshield as Ethan pulled into the parking lot of a modest business hotel on the outskirts of Columbus. He turned off the engine but made no move to get out. The silence inside the SUV felt louder than the storm outside. His phone rested face up on the center console. Naomi's picture still filled the lock screen. She was laughing in the photograph, her curls blowing across her face during a weekend trip to Lake Michigan. He stared at it until his vision blurred. How did we get here? He whispered. 7 years. 7 years of trust. 7 years of building a future together. And now, everything stood on the edge of collapse. Not because he had stopped loving her, but because he had convinced himself that carrying the burden alone was the same as protecting her. He had been wrong. Painfully wrong. Inside the hotel room, Ethan placed his overnight bag beside the bed. He didn't bother turning on the television. He wasn't hungry. He wasn't tired. He simply sat at the small desk near the window and opened his laptop. The screen displayed dozens of unopened emails from work. Bridge inspection reports, engineering revisions, meeting requests. Normally he would have answered every one before going to bed. Tonight, he closed the laptop without reading a single message. His thoughts belonged somewhere else. Or rather, to someone else. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and carefully removed a folded piece of paper. It was worn from being unfolded and refolded so many times. Across the top, in familiar handwriting, were 2 words. Dear Ethan. He closed his eyes. He still remembered the afternoon he had received the letter. 8 months earlier. His phone had rung just after sunrise. The caller ID displayed a name he hadn't seen in almost 3 years. Emily Carter, his younger sister. Ethan. Her voice had sounded unusually weak. Can you come? He had left work immediately. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and fresh flowers. Emily looked smaller than he remembered. The bright, adventurous younger sister, who had once convinced him to sneak into movie theaters and ride roller coasters 6 times in a row, now seemed almost fragile beneath the white blankets. You look terrible, Ethan joked gently. She rolled her eyes. You always were bad at compliments. He smiled, relieved to hear her teasing. For a few minutes, they talked about ordinary things. Their mother's latest obsession with gardening, a baseball game, an old family recipe. But eventually the conversation became quiet. Too quiet. Emily reached toward the bedside drawer. There's something I need you to have. She handed him a sealed envelope. I don't understand. You will? Well, her eyes filled with tears. I need you to promise you'll read it when you're alone. His smile faded. You're scaring me. I know. She looked toward the window. I'm scared too. That afternoon, Ethan sat alone in his truck outside the hospital. The envelope rested in his lap. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter and a sonogram picture. His heart skipped. He read the first line twice before it finally sank in. By the time you read this, you'll know I've been hiding something. Emily explained everything. Months earlier, she had discovered she was pregnant. The father had disappeared before learning about the baby. At almost the same time, doctors diagnosed her with an aggressive form of cancer. She had spent months trying to fight both battles at once. Treatment, fear, hope, despair. She hadn't told anyone because she couldn't bear the thought of becoming the center of everyone's lives, especially after watching their mother struggle through years of financial hardship. She had convinced herself she would recover, that she would raise her baby, that everything would somehow work out. Instead, the illness progressed much faster than anyone expected. Near the end of the letter came the sentence Ethan would never forget. If I don't survive, please don't let my baby grow up believing nobody wanted them. He couldn't breathe. His little sister, the fearless girl who had always run ahead instead of behind, was asking him to become someone's entire world. The weeks that followed passed in a blur. Hospital visits became daily routines. Between engineering projects, Ethan drove hundreds of miles to attend medical appointments, speak with social workers, and prepare paperwork he never imagined completing. When baby Lily was born prematurely, Emily held her daughter for only a few precious days. She smiled every time Ethan placed the tiny infant beside her. She's beautiful, Emily whispered. The most beautiful girl in the world. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. You'll make sure she knows I loved her. You'll tell her yourself. Emily smiled sadly. If I can't. You will. She reached for his hand. Promise me. He squeezed her fingers. I promise. Emily closed her eyes. "I knew I could count on you." Those were the last clear words she ever spoke to him. She passed away 2 days later. Back in the present, Ethan wiped away a tear. He folded the letter carefully and returned it to his pocket. The promise he had made to Emily had shaped every decision since that day. But promises often came with consequences. The emergency custody process had been more complicated than anyone expected. Because Lily's biological father had never legally surrendered his parental rights, the courts required months of hearings before permanent guardianship could even be considered. Every document, every interview, every background investigation, every temporary placement, everything had to remain confidential until the legal process concluded. Even the family attorney had warned him. "The fewer people who know before the hearings are complete, the better. We can't risk complications." Ethan had agreed. At the time, it had seemed like the responsible choice. He had planned to tell Naomi as soon as the judge allowed it. He imagined bringing her to meet Lily after everything became official. He imagined watching her smile. He imagined beginning their new chapter together. Instead, she had found him first, and without the truth, she had every reason to believe the worst. For the first time in months, Ethan admitted something to himself. The legal process hadn't been the only reason he kept silent. Part of him had been afraid. Afraid that asking Naomi to become an instant mother to a child she had never expected would change everything. Afraid she would feel trapped. Afraid she might walk away. The cruel irony wasn't lost on him. By trying so desperately not to lose her, he had created the very circumstances that pushed her away. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside the quiet hotel room, Ethan lowered his head into his hands. Tomorrow morning, he would meet with the family attorney again. Tomorrow afternoon, another custody hearing awaited. But, tonight, the only thing he could think about was Naomi. He wondered if she was crying. He wondered if she hated him. Most of all, he wondered whether there was still enough trust left to rebuild what his silence had broken. The Franklin County Family Court building looked ordinary from the outside. A square brick structure, large windows, a row of neatly trimmed hedges. Nothing about it hinted at the life-changing decisions made inside its walls every day. Ethan stood in the parking lot for a long moment before walking toward the entrance. He carried no engineering blueprints that morning. Instead, he held a thick folder filled with medical records, background checks, financial statements, character references, and every document the court had requested over the past 8 months. Every page represented another step toward keeping the promise he had made to Emily. But today, every step also reminded him of Naomi. The woman he loved believed he had built a secret family behind her back. If only she knew that every trip, every hearing, every anxious phone call had been leading to this moment. Inside the courtroom, Ethan recognized several familiar faces. Ms. Harper, the family attorney. Mr. Collins from Child Protective Services. The elderly woman Naomi had seen opening the front door in Indianapolis. Her name was Helen Dawson. She had been Emily's longtime neighbor and closest friend. When Emily became too weak during her pregnancy, Helen had taken her to doctor's appointments, cooked meals, and helped prepare the nursery. After Emily passed away, Helen became Lily's temporary foster caregiver while the custody process moved through the courts. She wasn't trying to replace Emily. She was simply making sure the baby was surrounded by love until family could legally bring her home. Helen smiled gently as Ethan approached. "How are you holding up?" He forced a small smile. "I've had better weeks." She studied his face. "This isn't only about today, is it?" He looked away. "No." "You told her?" "I couldn't." Helen sighed. "I was afraid of that. I thought I was protecting her." She gave him a sympathetic look. "Sometimes protecting people means trusting them with the truth." Her words lingered. They weren't spoken with judgment, only compassion. The hearing began shortly after 9. The judge reviewed months of reports. Social workers testified about Ethan's cooperation. His employer confirmed the flexibility of his work schedule. Friends described his character. One by one, every concern raised during the investigation had been addressed. Finally, the judge folded his hands. "Mr. Carter," Ethan stood, "you understand that accepting guardianship is not a temporary commitment." "Yes, Your Honor." "You understand that this child will rely on you emotionally, financially, and legally." "I do," the judge nodded. "And are you prepared to make those commitments for the rest of her childhood?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "I already have." Silence settled over the courtroom. Then the judge smiled faintly. "It is the opinion of this court that permanent guardianship serves the best interests of Lily Carter." The sound of the gavel echoed softly. "Petition granted." Ethan closed his eyes. Months of uncertainty seemed to lift all at once. He had kept his promise. Outside the courtroom, Helen placed baby Lily into Ethan's arms. The little girl blinked up at him with curious blue-gray eyes before wrapping her tiny fingers around one of his. He laughed quietly through tears. There you are. Lily responded with a sleepy yawn. Helen smiled. She always relaxes when she hears your voice. Ethan gently rocked her. I wish your mom could see you. The words escaped before he realized he had spoken them aloud. Helen rested a hand on his shoulder. I think she can. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The hallway buzzed with lawyers and families celebrating their own victories or quietly mourning disappointments. Yet Ethan felt strangely alone. He had gained a daughter, in every way that mattered. But he feared he had lost the woman he hoped would help him raise her. Later that afternoon, Miss Harper asked him to remain behind. There is one more matter. Ethan sat back down. She closed the office door before speaking. I know this process required confidentiality. He nodded. But confidentiality is no longer preventing you from speaking. He looked at the floor. I know. So why haven't you called her? He hesitated. I'm afraid. Of what? That she'll never believe me. Ms. Harper leaned forward. Mr. Carter, people don't rebuild trust with perfect explanations. He looked up. They rebuild it with honesty. I should have told her sooner. Yes. I kept waiting for the right time. There rarely is one. She offered a gentle smile. The question now isn't whether you made mistakes. It's whether you're willing to own them. That evening, Ethan drove back toward Columbus, with Lily sleeping peacefully in her car seat. The tiny stuffed elephant he had bought rested beside her. Every few minutes, he glanced into the rearview mirror. She looked so small, so completely dependent on him. His heart swelled with both joy and responsibility. At a red light, his phone buzzed. It wasn't Naomi. It was his mother. How did it go? Margaret asked the moment he answered. The judge approved everything. Oh, Ethan. He could hear her crying. I'm so proud of you. He smiled for the first time in days. Lily's coming home. And Naomi? The smile faded. I don't know. There was a long silence before Margaret spoke again. You know, your father used to tell me that love isn't measured by how few mistakes we make. Ethan listened quietly. It's measured by what we're willing to do after we make them. He looked toward the road ahead. What if I've already broken something that can't be fixed? His mother answered softly. Then your job isn't to decide the outcome. It's to tell the truth. Miles away, Naomi sat alone on the back porch of the house that suddenly felt far too quiet. The summer evening air carried the scent of jasmine from the garden Ethan had planted for her 2 years earlier. She held a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. Her phone rested beside her. She had picked it up a dozen times that afternoon. Each time, she put it back down. Part of her wanted answers. Another part feared that answers would only bring more pain. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she noticed a small envelope tucked beneath the porch mat. She frowned. It hadn't been there that morning. Across the front, written in Ethan's familiar handwriting, were just 3 words. For Naomi. She stared at the envelope, her heartbeat quickening. Slowly, she reached for it. She had no idea that the pages inside wouldn't erase her pain. But they would begin to change the story she believed she already knew. Naomi stared at the envelope for nearly a full minute. The handwriting was unmistakably Ethan's. Simple, neat, steady. The same handwriting that had filled birthday cards, grocery lists, and little notes tucked into her lunch bag on difficult work days. Good luck today. Those kids are lucky to have you. Don't forget to eat. I'll be home by 7. Love you. Those notes had once made her smile. Now, seeing his handwriting again made her chest ache. She slowly turned the envelope over. It wasn't sealed, almost as though Ethan wanted her to know she was free to read it, or throw it away. For a moment, she considered doing exactly that. She had spent the last 3 days convincing herself there was nothing left to hear. What difference could a letter make now? Then she remembered something her mother used to say. If you care enough to reach a conclusion, you should care enough to hear the whole story. Naomi took a slow breath. She unfolded the pages inside. Naomi, if you're reading this, thank you. I know I don't deserve your time right now. You asked me for the truth, and I failed you. Not because I wanted to deceive you, but because I believed silence would protect everyone involved. Looking back, I see that silence protected no one. Naomi paused. Her eyes lingered on that last sentence. Silence protected no one. She continued reading. I can't ask you to forgive me today. I can't even ask you to believe me immediately. All I can ask is that you finish reading before you decide who I really am. Her heartbeat quickened. Inside the house, the grandfather clock chimed softly. Outside, the evening breeze rustled the trees. Everything else seemed to disappear, as Naomi read on. 8 months ago, my sister Emily called me from a hospital. She was dying. Naomi blinked. Emily? Ethan had mentioned his younger sister over the years. She remembered meeting her only twice at family gatherings. Emily had been adventurous, funny, always making everyone laugh. Naomi hadn't seen her in months. She assumed Emily had simply been traveling for work. The letter continued. Emily had been hiding both a pregnancy and a cancer diagnosis. She believed she could beat the illness before anyone found out. She was wrong. Naomi lowered the pages. Her breathing became shallow. Cancer? Pregnancy? How had she never known? She read faster. Before she died, she asked me to promise that her baby would never grow up believing she had been abandoned. I promised her. A tear landed on the paper. Naomi wiped it away before the ink could smear. The next page explained the endless business trips. Hospital visits, emergency paperwork, home evaluations, meetings with social workers, family court hearings, background investigations, temporary guardianship, every unexplained absence, every mysterious phone call, every anxious expression. Everything she had interpreted as evidence of another relationship. It had all pointed somewhere else. Her stomach tightened. She remembered seeing the words, "Hearing confirmed Monday." Not an affair, a court hearing. She remembered the stuffed elephant. Not a gift for another woman. A toy for Emily's baby. She remembered the exhausted look on Ethan's face. She had mistaken grief for guilt. The realization settled over her with painful clarity. The final page was shorter than the others. None of this excuses what I did. I should have trusted you. I should have told you much sooner. I convinced myself I was protecting you from uncertainty. Instead, I forced you to create your own answers. And when people don't have the truth, they usually fill the silence with fear. I know your father's choices left scars that never fully healed. I should have remembered that. I'm sorry. If you never speak to me again, I'll understand. But I hope one day you'll believe one thing. There has never been another woman. There has never been another family. There has only been one promise I was trying to keep, and one woman I was terrified of losing. I love you. Always. Ethan. Naomi lowered the letter into her lap. She didn't cry immediately. She simply stared into the fading evening light. Her mind replayed every conversation they had shared over the past several months. Every time Ethan had looked as though he wanted to say something. Every pause. Every unfinished sentence. Every quiet apology. She had seen deception. Now she wondered how much of it had actually been desperation. Her phone buzzed. It was Carmen. Did you read it? Her friend asked after Naomi answered. Yes. What do you think? Naomi looked at the letter again. I don't know what to think. That's honest. I was so sure. I know. I saw the baby. And now you know whose baby she is. Naomi closed her eyes. I judged him before I asked a single question. Carmen remained quiet for a moment. You also had reasons to be afraid. I know, but fear isn't the same as truth. Those words lingered long after the call ended. Naomi folded the letter carefully. For the first time since she had looked through that nursery window, she allowed herself to consider a possibility she had refused to entertain. Maybe the man she loved hadn't betrayed her. Maybe both of them had been trapped by different kinds of fear. And maybe the hardest conversation of their lives was still waiting to happen. Naomi didn't leave the porch until the stars had begun to fill the night sky. The letter remained folded in her hands, its edges now softened from being opened and closed so many times. She had read it 4 times. Each reading uncovered something she had missed before. Not new facts, new feelings. The first time she saw only Ethan's explanation. The second time, she noticed his regret. The third time, she recognized his fear. By the fourth, she found herself wondering how lonely he must have felt carrying so much grief without the person he loved beside him. That realization hurt almost as much as believing he had betrayed her, because it meant they had both suffered alone. The next morning, Naomi called in for a personal day. It was the first unplanned day off she had taken in nearly a year. Normally, she would have felt guilty about leaving her young patients. Today, she knew she couldn't offer children encouragement while her own heart was so conflicted. Instead, she drove to a quiet park near the river. It was the same park where she often came whenever life felt overwhelming. She sat on a weathered bench overlooking the water. Families walked along the trail. Children chased ducks. An elderly couple shared a thermos of coffee while laughing over something only they understood. Naomi watched them silently. Relationships weren't built in grand moments. They were built in thousands of ordinary ones. The ordinary moments between her and Ethan had always been good. So why had one painful discovery outweighed 7 years of evidence? The answer came more quickly than she expected. Because old wounds speak louder than new memories if we never allow them to heal. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. I hoped I'd find you here. Naomi turned. Her mother, Denise, stood a few feet away, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You called Carmen," Naomi said. Denise smiled gently. "I did." Naomi accepted one of the cups. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Denise had always understood that silence wasn't necessarily something to be filled. Sometimes, people simply needed company. Eventually, Naomi handed her the letter. "I think you should read this." Denise read every page carefully. When she finished, she folded it exactly the way Ethan had. Then she looked out across the river. "He's been carrying a heavy burden." Naomi nodded. "I know, but I still can't stop thinking about the lies." Denise corrected her softly. "The secrets." Naomi frowned. "Is there really a difference?" "There can be. A lie is often told to gain something. A secret is often kept because someone is afraid." Naomi looked down at her coffee. "He still should have trusted me." "Yes, he should have." Denise didn't excuse Ethan. She didn't condemn him either. Instead, she asked a question. "Has Ethan ever given you another reason not to trust him?" Naomi searched her memory. Birthdays he never forgot. Promises he always kept. Long nights sitting beside her when she caught the flu. Driving 3 hours to surprise her after she'd lost a difficult young patient. Helping strangers change flat tires. Calling his mother every Wednesday. Showing up. Always showing up. Except this time. "No," Naomi admitted quietly. "He hasn't." Denise reached over and squeezed her hand. "One mistake doesn't erase 7 years. It also doesn't erase the pain it caused." "No, it doesn't." As they walked slowly along the river path, Denise shared something Naomi had never heard before. "When your father left." Naomi looked at her in surprise. "You've never wanted to talk about him." "I know, but maybe it's time." Denise took a deep breath. "For years, I convinced myself every man would eventually leave." Naomi stopped walking. "You?" Denise smiled sadly. "I wasn't born trusting people. I had to learn." "What changed?" "You." Naomi frowned. "What do you mean?" "I realized I couldn't teach my daughter to expect love if I only expected disappointment." Those words settled deep inside Naomi. Denise continued. "Your father hurt us. That was his choice. But every person after him deserved to be judged by their own actions." She looked directly into Naomi's eyes, not by his. Naomi felt tears forming again. "I don't know if I can forgive Ethan. You don't have to decide today. But don't confuse forgiveness with pretending nothing happened. They're not the same." That afternoon, Naomi stopped by Margaret Carter's house. She hadn't planned to. Her car simply turned onto the familiar street, almost on its own. Margaret opened the door with a surprised smile that quickly faded when she saw Naomi's expression. "Oh, sweetheart." Without another word, she embraced her. Naomi held on tightly. "I read Ethan's letter." Margaret nodded. "I hoped you would. Why didn't anyone tell me about Emily?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Because Emily begged us not to. She wanted privacy. She didn't want people remembering her for being sick." They sat together in the living room. Emily's childhood photographs still decorated the mantel. One picture showed her missing front teeth after falling off a bicycle. Another captured her graduation day. Margaret gently picked up the frame. "She would have loved you." Naomi smiled through tears. "I wish I'd known what she was going through." "So do I." Margaret sighed. "We all thought we had more time." Before Naomi left, Margaret walked her to the front porch. "I won't tell you what to do," she said. "This is between you and Ethan." Naomi nodded. "But I will tell you something my husband used to say." "What was that?" "The strongest relationships aren't the ones that never break. They're the ones where both people are willing to repair what was broken." Naomi thought about those words all the way home. Repair, not replace. Repair required honesty, patience, accountability. It also required 2 willing hearts. She knew Ethan owed her difficult answers. She also knew she owed him something, a chance to speak, without being interrupted by the fears she had carried since childhood. That evening, she walked into the spare bedroom where Ethan had been keeping several boxes for the upcoming move after their wedding. On top sat a framed photograph from their first trip together. Both of them were soaked from unexpected rain, laughing so hard neither could look at the camera. Naomi smiled despite herself. Love had been real. The pain was real too. Perhaps 2 things could be true at once. She picked up her phone. Her thumb hovered over Ethan's contact. She didn't press call. Not yet. Instead, she typed a single message. "Can we meet tomorrow? We need to talk. Really talk." She stared at the screen for several seconds before pressing send. Less than a minute later, 3 dots appeared. Then, Ethan's reply arrived. Yes, any time, anywhere, thank you. Naomi looked out the window as the evening sun painted the sky in shades of gold. Tomorrow wouldn't erase the hurt. It wouldn't magically restore trust. But for the first time since she looked through that nursery window, both of them would finally have the chance to tell the whole truth. We've reached a turning point. Naomi finally knows the truth. But knowing the truth doesn't instantly heal a broken heart. Trust, once shaken, isn't restored overnight. It takes honesty, accountability, patience, and the willingness to listen with an open heart. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were Naomi, would you give Ethan another chance after reading his letter? Or would the months of secrecy be too much to forgive? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read as many of your comments as I can, and your perspective might encourage someone else who is struggling with trust, forgiveness, or communication in their own relationship. If this story has touched your heart so far, please like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring story filled with love, life lessons, and unforgettable endings. Remember, every like, comment, and share helps these stories reach more people who may need hope, healing, or simply a reminder that love is worth fighting for. In the next chapter, Naomi and Ethan will sit down for the conversation they've both been avoiding, the conversation that could either save their future or end it forever. Let's continue. Naomi arrived at the botanical garden 15 minutes early. It wasn't an accident. Whenever something mattered, she preferred having a few quiet moments to gather herself before anyone else arrived. The garden had always been one of her favorite places in Columbus. It was peaceful without feeling lonely, beautiful without trying too hard. Winding stone paths curved around flower beds bursting with color, while towering oak trees cast gentle shade over weathered wooden benches. It was also where Ethan had first told her he loved her. Of all the places they could have chosen to meet, it felt fitting. If they were going to decide the future of their relationship, they should do it somewhere that reminded them why they had fallen in love in the first place. She sat on the same bench where they had shared that conversation years earlier. Back then, everything had seemed simple. Today, nothing did. A few minutes later, she spotted Ethan walking toward her. He looked different. Not physically, emotionally. The confidence she had always admired seemed replaced by quiet uncertainty. When he reached the bench, he stopped several feet away. I wasn't sure you'd come, he admitted. Naomi managed a faint smile. I almost didn't. He nodded. I probably would have felt the same. Neither of them reached for a hug. Neither offered a handshake. For two people who had once found comfort simply sitting shoulder to shoulder, the distance between them suddenly felt enormous. Can I sit? Ethan asked. She nodded. Please. He lowered himself onto the opposite end of the bench, leaving enough space between them that another person could have sat comfortably in the middle. For a long moment, they simply watched a family of ducks glide across the nearby pond. It was Ethan who finally broke the silence. Thank you for reading the letter. Naomi looked down at her hands. I read it 4 times. He let out a slow breath. I don't know if that makes me feel better or worse. It shouldn't make you feel either. He glanced at her. You're right. I wasn't reading it for you. I was reading it because I needed to know whether the man I thought I knew was real. His eyes softened. And? Naomi didn't answer immediately. I think he was. Those 4 words carried more hope than Ethan had allowed himself to feel in days. But Naomi wasn't finished. I also think he made the biggest mistake of our relationship. I did. No excuses? He shook his head. No. You could have told me. I could have. You should have. I should have. She studied his face carefully. There was no defensiveness, no attempt to justify his choices. After another quiet moment, Naomi asked the question that had been lingering in her heart. When did you decide not to tell me? Ethan sighed. I didn't decide all at once. What do you mean? The first week, I thought I'd tell you after Emily's surgery. He looked toward the pond. Then the surgery didn't go well. So I thought I'd wait until she was feeling stronger. He paused. Then she wasn't. Naomi listened without interrupting. After she died. His voice faltered. Everything became paperwork, court dates, emergency placements, background checks. I kept thinking, just one more week. Then, another. And another. I convinced myself there would be a perfect moment. He laughed quietly, though there was no humor in it. There never was. Naomi nodded slowly. Sometimes waiting for the perfect time becomes another way of avoiding a difficult conversation. Ethan looked at her with quiet surprise. I've said those exact words to parents at the clinic. She smiled sadly. I know. They both did. A breeze carried flower petals across the path. Several landed near Ethan's shoes. He watched them for a moment before speaking again. Can I ask you something? You can. When you saw me with Lily. He hesitated. Why didn't you come inside? Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Because I wasn't 34 years old anymore. He frowned. I don't understand. I was 9. He remained silent. My father told my mother he was leaving for work. She swallowed hard. A few months later, I learned he'd started another family. Her voice grew quieter. When I saw you holding that baby. She looked directly at him. I stopped seeing you. I started seeing him. The admission hung between them. Ethan felt his heart ache. Not because it excused what had happened, but because he finally understood the depth of the wound Naomi had been carrying for most of her life. I wish I'd remembered that, he whispered. So do I. I knew how much your father's leaving hurt you. You did, and somehow. He shook his head. I still believed silence was safer than honesty. Naomi looked toward the pond again. We were both listening to old fears. She turned back to him. Mine told me everyone eventually leaves. A tear slipped down Ethan's cheek. Mine told me that if I asked too much of someone, they'd leave. Neither fear had protected them. Both had nearly destroyed them. A little girl, no older than 7, ran past the bench chasing bubbles floating through the air. Her father laughed as he followed behind with a small bottle of bubble solution. The child tripped. Before anyone could react, she caught herself, stood up, and laughed even harder. Naomi smiled. Kids are amazing. They really are. They fall. They cry. And then 5 minutes later they're laughing again. Ethan nodded. Adults don't recover that quickly. No. She smiled gently. We tend to carry our falls much longer. They shared the first genuine smile they'd exchanged since everything unraveled. It was small, fragile, but real. And for the first time in weeks, it felt as though they weren't standing on opposite sides of a battle. They were simply two imperfect people trying to understand how they had gotten lost. The afternoon sun drifted behind a bank of soft clouds, casting gentle shadows across the garden. Neither Naomi nor Ethan seemed eager to end the conversation. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, they weren't arguing. They were listening. And somehow, listening felt far more difficult than speaking. Ethan rested his forearms on his knees. There are a few things I need to say, he began quietly. Naomi nodded. I'm listening. I wasn't afraid of becoming Lily's guardian. He smiled faintly. The moment Emily asked me, my answer was already yes. His expression became more serious. What terrified me was asking you to change your entire future overnight. Naomi looked at him without interrupting. We were planning our wedding. We talked about traveling, buying our first home. Starting a family someday. He looked down at his hands. And suddenly, someday became today. He let out a slow breath. I kept thinking, what if Naomi feels trapped? What if she thinks I'm asking her to give up the life we planned? So, instead of giving me a choice, Naomi said softly, you made the choice for me. Ethan closed his eyes. Yes, I did. It was wrong. She appreciated that he didn't argue. He didn't hide behind good intentions. He simply owned the mistake. That mattered more than she expected. Naomi folded her hands in her lap. Can I be honest about something? I hope you will. When I first read your letter, she paused. I wanted to forgive you immediately. Ethan looked surprised. But then I remembered every night I cried myself to sleep. Every phone call where I wondered who you were really with. Every time I questioned my own instincts. She took a deep breath. I realized forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a journey. He nodded slowly. I understand. No. Hey, she smiled sadly. I don't think either of us fully understands yet. A gardener pushed a wheelbarrow past the nearby flower beds. He stopped to remove a few weeds before continuing down the path. Naomi watched him for a moment. My grandmother loved gardening. Ethan smiled. I remember. She used to tell me something. What was it? If you ignore the weeds because they're small, one day they'll choke the flowers. She looked back at him. Our relationship wasn't destroyed by one giant lie. It was damaged by dozens of little silences. Ethan swallowed hard. You're right. I kept pulling weeds everywhere except the one place that mattered most. She tilted her head. What do you mean? I handled every legal problem. Every court hearing. Every hospital visit. But I ignored the growing distance between us. He looked at her with quiet regret. I thought I had more time. Naomi nodded. So did I. For a few moments, they simply listened to the wind rustling through the trees. Finally, Ethan reached into the messenger bag resting beside his feet. I brought something. He carefully removed a small photo album. Naomi looked at him curiously. What's this? The last 8 months. He handed it to her. You deserve to know everything. She opened the first page, a hospital room. Emily smiling weakly while holding a tiny newborn wrapped in a pink blanket. Naomi covered her mouth. The next page showed Ethan asleep in an uncomfortable hospital chair beside the baby's bassinet. Another picture showed stacks of paperwork spread across a kitchen table. A social worker smiling beside Helen. Lily's first smile. Lily's first doctor's appointment. Nothing about the album looked like another family. It looked like grief, responsibility, love, and exhaustion. Naomi turned another page. Tucked inside was a photograph she hadn't expected. It showed Ethan sitting in the nursery. He wasn't looking at the camera. Instead, he was staring at an engagement ring resting in the palm of his hand. Across the bottom, written in his handwriting, were the words, I hope she still says yes when this is over. A tear rolled down Naomi's cheek. You carried my ring with you? Every trip. Why? Because it reminded me what I was fighting to come home to. Naomi closed the album gently. I wish I'd seen this before. So do I. I also wish you'd trusted me enough to let me help. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. I know. He looked toward the pond before speaking again. Can I tell you something I never admitted to anyone? She nodded. The night Emily died. His voice trembled. I sat in the hospital chapel for almost 3 hours. I wasn't praying. I was panicking. I had no idea how to raise a baby. I barely knew how to change a diaper. Naomi couldn't help smiling through her tears. I believe that. He laughed quietly. Helen had to teach me everything. The first time I tried putting Lily's diaper on backward, she laughed so hard she cried. Naomi laughed too. The sound surprised both of them. It was the first real laughter they had shared in weeks. It didn't erase the pain, but it reminded them that joy still existed beside it. I haven't met her, Naomi said softly. Lily. No, you haven't. Ethan hesitated. I'm not asking you to. She looked at him. Not today. Not until you're ready. I won't pressure you. Naomi appreciated those words. There had been a time when she thought love meant asking someone to leap without hesitation. Now she understood something different. Real love also respected timing. The garden began to grow quieter as evening approached. Families packed picnic baskets. Children headed toward the parking lot. The peaceful afternoon was coming to an end. Naomi stood. So, Ethan asked carefully, where do we go from here? She considered the question for several seconds. I don't know. He nodded. I figured. But I know where we don't go. He looked at her hopefully. We don't pretend none of this happened. No. We don't rush. No. And we don't make promises we aren't ready to keep. A faint smile crossed Ethan's face. That sounds fair. Naomi took one slow step toward him. For the first time since they met at the garden, the distance between them disappeared. She wrapped her arms around him. Not tightly, not with certainty, but with honesty. Ethan returned the embrace carefully, as though afraid she might change her mind. Neither of them spoke. Some apologies didn't need more words. Some forgiveness began not with certainty, but with the willingness to stop walking away. When they finally stepped back, Naomi smiled gently. One conversation doesn't fix us. I know, but it's a beginning. Ethan nodded. And beginnings are worth protecting. As they walked toward the parking lot together, neither knew exactly what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time since the truth came to light, they were walking in the same direction. 3 days passed before Naomi saw Ethan again. Not because either of them was avoiding the other. They had agreed, without saying the words aloud, that healing needed room to breathe. Instead of constant phone calls, they exchanged short messages. Good morning. Hope work goes well today. Drive safely. Simple. Honest. No pretending everything was suddenly normal. No pressure to force the relationship back to where it had been. For the first time in weeks, they weren't trying to solve everything at once. They were simply showing up. Sometimes, consistency is the first language of trust. Monday morning brought Naomi back to the Pediatric Rehabilitation Center. The familiar sounds of children's laughter echoed through the halls. Colorful artwork covered the walls. Parents waited patiently outside therapy rooms. It felt comforting to return to a place where progress was measured one small step at a time. Her first appointment was with 8-year-old Mason, who was recovering from a serious leg injury after a bicycle accident. He frowned as he struggled through another balancing exercise. I'm tired of falling, he muttered. Naomi knelt beside him. Do you know something I've learned from every child I've ever worked with? He shook his head. The strongest people aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who get up one more time than they fall. Mason thought about that. So, I just keep trying? She smiled. Exactly. He stood again. His first attempt failed. The second was better. The third was steady. By the end of the session, he had crossed the practice beam without help. His mother wiped away proud tears. Watching them, Naomi realized something. Healing never happened all at once. It happened through hundreds of tiny decisions to keep moving forward. Relationships weren't much different. That evening, Ethan texted, "Would you like to meet Lily?" Naomi stared at the message for several minutes. Her heart raced. Just a week earlier, the thought had filled her with dread. Now, it filled her with uncertainty. She wasn't afraid of Lily. She was afraid of what meeting Lily represented. It meant stepping into the future they had never planned. A future shaped by grief, responsibility, and unexpected love. She finally replied, "Yes, but only if it feels right for her." Ethan answered almost immediately. "She's very good at deciding who she likes." A few seconds later, another message appeared. "Fair warning. She usually wins people over." Naomi smiled before she realized she was smiling. It was the first time in days that laughter had come naturally. The following Saturday afternoon, Naomi parked outside Helen Dawson's house. The white home with blue shutters looked very different now. The last time she had been there, she had arrived carrying suspicion. Today, she arrived carrying humility. Ethan opened the front door before she had a chance to knock. "You came. I said I would." He nodded. "I know." Those simple words meant more than either of them admitted. Inside, the house smelled faintly of vanilla and fresh bread. Helen appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray of iced tea. Her warm smile immediately eased some of Naomi's nervousness. "I'm very glad you're here." Naomi smiled politely. "I'm glad you invited me." Helen reached over and squeezed her hand. "There's someone who's been waiting to meet you." Naomi laughed softly. "I doubt she knows that." Helen winked. "Babies understand more than we give them credit for." The nursery door stood slightly open. Naomi's heartbeat quickened as she stepped closer. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the pale blue walls she remembered seeing from outside. Everything looked familiar. Yet everything felt different. Because this time, she wasn't looking through a window. She had been welcomed inside. Ethan walked quietly toward the crib. A tiny pair of curious eyes looked up at him. "There she is," he whispered. Lily smiled. Not the wide smile of an older child. Just the tiny, uncertain smile of a baby beginning to recognize familiar faces. Ethan gently lifted her into his arms. She reached immediately for the collar of his shirt. Naomi watched in silence. There was no doubt now. Not about the truth. Not about the love Ethan already felt for this little girl. It wasn't the love of a man hiding a secret. It was the love of an uncle who had become a father because life had asked him to. He turned toward Naomi. "Would you like to say hello?" Naomi took one cautious step forward, then another. Lily studied her with serious blue-gray eyes. For several seconds, neither moved. Then, unexpectedly, the baby stretched out one tiny hand. Naomi looked at Ethan. "I think she's reaching for you." He smiled. "I think she's reaching for both of us." Very slowly, Naomi extended her finger. Lily wrapped her tiny hand around it. Such a small gesture, barely noticeable to anyone else. But, to Naomi, it felt enormous. Tears filled her eyes. This innocent little girl had unknowingly become the center of so much pain. Yet she had done nothing except exist. Helen quietly spoke from the doorway. "Children never choose the circumstances they're born into. They only hope someone chooses them." The words settled over the room. Naomi looked at Lily again. The baby giggled softly, completely unaware of the complicated emotions surrounding her. Naomi found herself laughing too. A gentle, genuine laugh. One that came from somewhere deeper than relief. It came from compassion. They spent the afternoon together. Helen shared stories about Emily, how she loved old jazz records, how she insisted on eating pancakes for dinner, how she once drove 3 hours just to rescue an injured stray dog. Naomi listened carefully. She wished she had known this version of Emily. Not the woman described by illness, but the vibrant sister Ethan had grown up loving. At one point, Helen placed an old photo album on the coffee table. Inside were pictures of Emily as a child. One photograph caught Naomi's attention immediately. A teenage Emily stood beside Ethan on graduation day. Written underneath in blue ink were the words, "No matter where life takes us, you'll always be my safe place." Naomi looked at Ethan. "You kept your promise." His eyes glistened. "I tried." "No." She smiled softly. You did. For the first time since everything had unraveled, Ethan believed she wasn't only talking about Emily. She was talking about them, not because everything had been repaired, but because hope had quietly found its way back into the room. By the time the afternoon sun settled lower in the sky, the atmosphere inside Helen's house felt noticeably lighter. Not because every wound had healed, but because the silence that had once separated Naomi and Ethan had finally been replaced with conversation. Honest conversation, the kind that wasn't afraid of difficult truths. Helen carried Lily into the kitchen to prepare her afternoon bottle, leaving Naomi and Ethan alone in the living room for the first time that day. For several moments, neither spoke. Instead, they looked around the room. Family photographs covered the walls. Emily's graduation picture, a faded Christmas portrait from years ago. A framed watercolor painting Lily's tiny handprints, now decorated with bright pink paint. Life had continued, even through loss. Naomi broke the silence first. "I've been thinking about something." Ethan looked at her. "What is it?" "I realized I spent so much time asking myself whether I could trust you again." She paused. "That I never asked whether you could trust me." He looked surprised. "What do you mean?" She folded her hands together. "When I saw you with Lily, I never gave you the chance to explain. I made a decision before I heard your voice." Ethan shook his head gently. "You had every reason to feel hurt. I had reasons to ask questions." She smiled sadly. "I chose conclusions instead." He looked down for a moment. "And I gave you every reason to reach those conclusions." For the first time since they had begun repairing their relationship, neither of them was trying to decide whose mistake had been bigger. They simply accepted that both had contributed to the distance between them. Sometimes healing begins the moment people stop keeping score. Helen returned carrying Lily, who had clearly decided that staying awake was much more interesting than taking a nap. The baby looked around the room with wide, curious eyes before spotting Naomi again. Almost immediately, she reached toward her. Helen laughed. "Well, I think you've been chosen." Naomi instinctively looked at Ethan. "You sure?" He smiled warmly. "I've learned something about Lily." "What's that?" "She doesn't reach for people unless she feels comfortable." Naomi hesitated only a second before carefully accepting the baby into her arms. Lily was lighter than she expected. Warm. Peaceful. Tiny fingers immediately found the sleeve of Naomi's sweater. Naomi smiled. "Hi there." The baby blinked up at her before letting out a tiny giggle. Everyone in the room laughed. Helen shook her head. "Emily used to do exactly that." "What?" She smiled at complete strangers. Naomi looked down at Lily. "I guess kindness runs in the family." For the next hour, conversation flowed naturally. Not once did anyone pretend the past few weeks hadn't happened. But neither did they allow those painful weeks to define the entire afternoon. Helen shared stories about Emily's childhood. Ethan admitted that he had nearly put Lily's pajamas on backward during his first week caring for her. Naomi laughed so hard she nearly spilled her lemonade. "I would have paid money to see that." Helen pointed toward Ethan. "You should have seen him trying to fold a stroller. It took 45 minutes. It was a complicated stroller. It was already assembled." Even Ethan laughed. The sound filled the room. It wasn't forced. It wasn't careful. It was genuine. Naomi hadn't realized how much she had missed hearing him laugh. It reminded her of the man she met in the bookstore 7 years earlier. The man who had laughed after she spilled coffee all over him instead of getting angry. Some parts of him had never changed. Later that afternoon, Helen excused herself to prepare dinner. Ethan and Naomi carried Lily onto the back porch. A gentle breeze moved through the maple trees. Birds chirped from somewhere nearby. Lily rested comfortably against Naomi's shoulder, her tiny eyelids growing heavier by the minute. Ethan watched quietly. "I've imagined this moment 100 times. Naomi looked at him. "What moment?" "You meeting her." She smiled softly. "I don't think either of us imagined it happening this way." "No." He chuckled. "Definitely not." Silence settled comfortably between them. Not awkward, not strained, simply peaceful. Finally, Naomi asked the question she had been carrying all afternoon. "What happens now?" Ethan looked toward the backyard. "The court process is finished. Lily comes home with me next week." He hesitated. "I've been turning the guest room into a nursery." Naomi pictured their house, the room they had planned to use as a home office. Shelves for books, a desk near the window. Now it would become a nursery instead. Life had rewritten their plans. Not because they had chosen it. Because life sometimes writes chapters we never expect. "I've been thinking about something else," Ethan admitted. "What?" "I don't want you to feel pressured." She frowned. "If..." He searched for the right words. "If you decide we're better apart." His voice became quieter. I'll understand. Naomi looked at him carefully. You really believe that? I don't want Lily growing up in a home built on guilt. She appreciated that answer. It wasn't manipulative. It wasn't designed to make her stay. It was honest. I haven't decided everything yet. I know, but I have decided one thing. Ethan waited. I don't want fear making my decisions anymore. His eyes met hers. Neither do I. Just then, Lily stirred in Naomi's arms. She opened sleepy eyes, looked from Naomi to Ethan, and reached both little hands toward them at the same time. Without thinking, Ethan stepped closer. Together, they adjusted the baby's blanket. Their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. For a brief moment, the three of them stood together beneath the fading afternoon light. Helen quietly watched from the kitchen window. She smiled to herself. Not because she believed every problem had disappeared, but because she recognized something she hadn't seen since Emily passed away. Hope, real hope, rarely arrives with fireworks. Sometimes, it looks like two people standing side by side, choosing patience over pride. As evening approached, Naomi prepared to leave. Helen hugged her tightly. Come back whenever you'd like. I'd love that. Then, Helen whispered something only Naomi could hear. Lily needs good people in her life. She smiled warmly. So do Ethan and you. Outside, Ethan walked Naomi to her car. Before she opened the driver's door, she turned toward him. Thank you. For what? For trusting me today. He smiled. I should have started doing that months ago. She nodded. Then, let's not make the same mistake twice. He extended his hand. Not for romance. Not for obligation. Simply as a promise. Naomi looked at it for a moment before taking it. One day at a time, she said. One day at a time, Ethan agreed. As Naomi drove away, she glanced once in the rearview mirror. Ethan stood in the driveway watching until her car disappeared around the corner. For the first time in a long while, neither of them felt trapped by the past. The future was still uncertain, but it no longer felt impossible. The following Monday morning marked the beginning of a completely different routine. For the first time since becoming Lily's legal guardian, Ethan buckled her into the car seat in front of his own home instead of Helen's. He stood there for a moment after closing the back door. The quiet street looked exactly the same as it had a month earlier. Neighbors walked their dogs. A school bus rolled past. The mail carrier waved from across the road. Everything around him seemed ordinary, yet his life had changed forever. He glanced through the rearview mirror. Lily was asleep, clutching the little stuffed elephant he had bought the day Naomi followed him to Indianapolis. The toy had become her favorite. It looks like this is home now, he whispered. The house felt different with a baby inside. The silence disappeared. It was replaced by tiny giggles, soft cries, the whir of a baby monitor, and the occasional crash of a toy hitting the hardwood floor. Ethan quickly discovered that engineering had prepared him for many things. Babies were not one of them. One morning, he accidentally warmed a bottle too much. Another day, he put Lily's tiny socks in the dishwasher instead of the washing machine after staying awake most of the night. When he realized what he had done, he laughed at himself. I can calculate the load capacity of a suspension bridge. He held up one tiny sock. But, apparently I can't operate household appliances before coffee. Lily squealed with delight, as if she completely agreed. Meanwhile, Naomi found herself thinking about Lily far more often than she expected. At work, she caught herself smiling whenever one of her young patients laughed. She found herself browsing children's books during her lunch break. Without realizing it, she picked up a picture book about courage. She stared at the cover, then quietly bought it. Not because anyone had asked her to, because she wanted to. That realization surprised her. Healing wasn't something she was forcing anymore. It was happening naturally. Later that week, Ethan received an unexpected visitor. His mother arrived, carrying 2 large casserole dishes. I know you, Margaret said, as she walked inside. You've been surviving on frozen meals. I resent how accurate that is. She smiled. I raised you. She immediately noticed unfolded laundry sitting on the couch, baby bottles drying beside the sink, toy blocks scattered across the living room. Instead of criticizing him, she laughed. This house finally looks lived in. Ethan smiled. It definitely feels that way. Margaret picked up Lily and kissed her forehead. Your mommy would have loved seeing you so spoiled. The room became quiet. Emily's absence was still deeply felt. Grief had become softer, but it had not disappeared. Margaret looked toward Ethan. Have you spoken to Naomi? We've been taking things slowly. And how does that feel? Scary. She nodded knowingly. Good relationships usually require courage. That Friday evening, Naomi stopped by after work. She wasn't expected. She hadn't even called. She simply found herself standing on Ethan's front porch, with a children's book tucked beneath one arm. When Ethan opened the door, surprise quickly turned into a warm smile. "I wasn't expecting company." "I know." She held up the book. "I brought someone a gift." Before Ethan could answer, Lily's excited babbling echoed from the living room. Naomi laughed. "I think she remembers me. I think she's been hoping you'd come back." Naomi stepped inside. The house looked completely transformed. A colorful playmat now covered part of the living room floor. Tiny toys filled a basket near the couch. Family photographs had been rearranged. One new frame caught Naomi's attention. It showed Emily holding Lily shortly after her birth. Beside it stood another frame, a picture from years earlier. Naomi and Ethan laughing in the rain during their first vacation together. Neither photograph had replaced the other. They stood side by side. Different chapters, same family. Lily crawled enthusiastically toward Naomi the moment she saw her. Naomi knelt. "Hi, sweetheart." The little girl clapped her hands before reaching upward. Naomi lifted her effortlessly. "Someone's gotten heavier." Ethan laughed. "Tell me about it." Naomi handed Lily the wrapped picture book. The baby immediately tried chewing on the corner. "I don't think she's ready for bedtime stories yet." "Oh, she loves stories. She just hasn't figured out which part you're supposed to read." They both laughed. It was easy, comfortable, almost familiar again. As the evening continued, Naomi helped prepare dinner. Not because Ethan asked, because it felt natural. He chopped vegetables while she stirred soup. Lily sat safely in her high chair, enthusiastically introducing mashed carrots to every available surface except her mouth. Naomi burst into laughter. "I think more of it's on the tray than in her stomach." Ethan looked at the orange mess. "I'll call that a partial success." "You've gotten good at this." He smiled. "I'm learning." She looked at him thoughtfully. "You know what I admire most?" "What?" "You never acted like becoming Lily's guardian was something you had to survive. You treated it like someone you were privileged to love." Ethan became quiet. "I made Emily a promise." "No," Naomi gently corrected him. "You made Lily one too." After dinner, they sat together on the back porch, while Lily slept peacefully in the baby monitor beside them. The evening air was cool. Fireflies blinked across the yard. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Naomi broke the silence. "I've been thinking about our wedding." Ethan looked at her carefully. "I'm not asking when. I'm not asking if. I just—" He smiled gently. "This dreaming about it." Naomi leaned back in her chair. "So do I." She looked toward the stars. "But maybe our dream just looks different now." Ethan followed her gaze. "I think different can still be beautiful." Naomi nodded. She wasn't ready to set a new date. She wasn't ready to pretend nothing had happened. But for the first time, she could imagine a future again. Not the future they had planned, the future they had earned. And somehow, that future felt even stronger. A gentle rain began falling just before sunrise. Naomi woke to the soft tapping against her bedroom window and, for the first time in weeks, realized she hadn't dreamed about the nursery in Indianapolis. She hadn't dreamed about her father either. Instead, she had dreamed about Lily laughing as she chased bubbles across a backyard. It wasn't a dramatic change. It was something quieter. Her mind was finally making room for new memories. She smiled to herself. Healing rarely announces its arrival. Sometimes, it slips into your life so quietly that you only recognize it when the nightmares begin to fade. Later that morning, Naomi received a text from Ethan. "Good morning. Lily has discovered how to throw her spoon across the kitchen. Apparently, breakfast is now an extreme sport." A second message followed almost immediately. "I hope your first patient goes well today." Naomi laughed. She quickly replied, "Tell Lily that spoons belong on the table, not in orbit. And thank you. I hope your meeting goes well too." A few seconds later, another message appeared. "She disagrees with your professional opinion." Naomi shook her head, smiling. One of the nurses walking past her office noticed. "That's the happiest I've seen you in a while." Naomi looked up. "Really?" The nurse nodded. "Whatever changed, keep doing it." Naomi thought about those words long after the conversation ended. That afternoon, one of her teenage patients arrived looking unusually discouraged. His name was Jordan, a 16-year-old recovering from a serious shoulder injury after a football accident. He had been making excellent progress until recently. Now he barely looked at her. "I don't think this matters anymore," he muttered. Naomi pulled up a chair beside him. "What happened?" "The coach picked someone else. I'm probably never getting my position back." She listened without interrupting. When he finally stopped talking, she asked quietly, "Can I tell you something?" He shrugged. When I was your age, I thought losing something meant my life would never be the same. He looked at her. And? I was right. He frowned. That's supposed to make me feel better? She smiled. I wasn't finished. My life wasn't the same. It became different. And different isn't always worse. Jordan remained silent. You don't measure your future by what you've lost. You measure it by what you choose to build next. Those words surprised even Naomi. She realized she wasn't only encouraging her patient, she was reminding herself. That evening, Ethan invited Naomi to join him and Lily at a neighborhood park. Children laughed from the playground while parents sat nearby on benches, chatting as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Lily sat on a blanket beneath a large maple tree, fascinated by the grass beneath her tiny fingers. Every few seconds, she looked up to make sure both Ethan and Naomi were still nearby. Then she smiled. Naomi noticed. She checks for you. Ethan nodded. Babies, look for safe places. Naomi watched Lily crawl toward Ethan before immediately turning back toward her. And she keeps checking for both of us. Ethan smiled. I noticed. For several quiet moments, they simply watched Lily explore the world one handful of grass at a time. Children have an incredible way of teaching adults to slow down. Lily wasn't worried about yesterday. She wasn't anxious about tomorrow. She was completely absorbed in the present moment. Naomi wished adults could do the same. A little boy nearby accidentally dropped his ice cream. He stared at the melting cone for 2 heartbreaking seconds before bursting into tears. His father knelt beside him. I know you're disappointed. The little boy sniffled. It was my favorite. I know. The father smiled gently. Want to know something? What? Sometimes the best part of the day happens after the part that makes us cry. The boy wiped his eyes. Really? Really. Together, they walked toward the ice cream truck for another cone. Naomi watched them disappear into the growing crowd. That's beautiful, she whispered. Ethan followed her gaze. What is? He didn't tell his son to stop crying. He acknowledged the disappointment first. Then he offered hope. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. I think adults need that too. She looked at him. We probably do. As twilight settled over the park, Lily began rubbing her sleepy eyes. Naomi instinctively lifted her onto her shoulder. Within minutes, the little girl had fallen asleep. Ethan watched quietly. She trusts you. Naomi smiled. I hope so. I know so. He hesitated before continuing. There's something I've been meaning to ask. She looked at him. What is it? I've been meeting with a counselor. Naomi blinked. You have? He nodded. After everything happened, I realized I don't always know how to carry grief in healthy ways. She smiled softly. I'm proud of you. I also wondered. He paused. If maybe we could go together. Couples counseling? Not because we're failing. Because I never want us to end up here again. Naomi didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked down at the sleeping child in her arms. Then back at Ethan. You know. My patients' parents ask me all the time when they should seek help. And what do you tell them? She smiled. I tell them the best time is before small problems become big ones. Ethan laughed quietly. So you'll follow your own advice? She nodded. Yes. I think I will. His shoulders relaxed. It wasn't a dramatic victory. It was something much more meaningful. They had chosen growth over pride. They walked slowly back toward the parking lot. Halfway there, Naomi stopped. Ethan? Yeah? She looked directly into his eyes. I can't promise we'll never hurt each other again. I know, but I can promise this. She reached for his hand. If something scares me, I'll tell you. He gently squeezed her hand. And if something burdens me, I'll let you carry it with me. No grand speeches, no dramatic music. Just 2 promises spoken beneath a sky turning shades of orange and lavender. Promises built not on perfection, but on wisdom earned through pain. As they reached the car, Ethan carefully buckled Lily into her seat. The little girl stirred for a moment before falling asleep again. Naomi watched the tiny rise and fall of her chest. A few weeks earlier, that little girl had represented everything she feared. Now, she represented something entirely different. A second chance, not only for Ethan, not only for their relationship, but for Naomi herself. Because for the first time since she was 9 years old, she was choosing not to let yesterday decide tomorrow. Autumn arrived quietly. The maple trees lining Ethan's street traded their summer greens for shades of amber and crimson, while cool morning air hinted that winter wasn't far behind. Life had settled into a rhythm neither Ethan nor Naomi could have imagined just a few months earlier. Every Tuesday evening, They attended counseling together. Every Thursday, Naomi came over after work to help with dinner. Most Saturdays were spent at the park, the zoo, or simply playing on the living room floor with Lily, whose newest discovery was that she could crawl much faster than any adult expected. The healing wasn't dramatic, it was ordinary. And perhaps that was what made it real. Trust wasn't returning because of one grand apology. It was returning because, day after day, both of them chose honesty over fear. One Thursday evening, Naomi arrived to find Ethan kneeling on the kitchen floor. Lily sat in front of him wearing a tiny chef's apron that read, "Little Taste Tester." Carrots were scattered everywhere. A wooden spoon rested on top of Ethan's head. Lily clapped excitedly. Naomi leaned against the doorway, trying not to laugh. "Should I ask?" Ethan looked up. "I thought we'd cook together." She raised an eyebrow. "It looks more like you lost a battle." "I definitely did." Lily squealed as though celebrating her victory. Naomi laughed so hard she had to wipe tears from her eyes. "You know, Duh, I've worked with children for years. But somehow this little girl creates chaos more efficiently than anyone I've ever met." Ethan smiled. "She gets that from Emily." As they cleaned the kitchen together, Ethan noticed Naomi moving through the house differently. She no longer hesitated before opening cabinets. She instinctively reached for Lily's favorite bib. She knew exactly where the baby bottles were kept. Without thinking about it, she had begun making herself at home again. Not because anyone asked her to, because her heart had slowly found its way back. Counseling had helped more than either of them expected. During one session, their therapist had said something Naomi wrote in a notebook and carried with her ever since. Trust isn't believing someone will never hurt you. Trust is believing they'll tell you the truth when something is difficult. That sentence had changed everything. She stopped asking whether Ethan had made mistakes. Of course he had. So had she. Instead, she started asking a different question. Are we becoming the kind of people who can face those mistakes together? The answer, little by little, was yes. After dinner, they sat on the back porch while Lily slept upstairs. The porch swing creaked gently beneath them. Ethan broke the comfortable silence. "I heard from the courthouse today." Naomi turned toward him. "Everything okay?" He nodded. "More than okay." He reached into his pocket and handed her an official envelope. Inside was a single certificate. The court had finalized Lily's adoption. Her name now officially read, Lily Grace Carter. Naomi smiled as tears filled her eyes. "You did it." Ethan shook his head. "We did it." She looked at him. "I didn't do anything." "You did more than you realize. You gave me another chance. You welcomed Lily. You reminded me that asking for help isn't weakness." He smiled softly. "I don't think I could have become the father she deserves without becoming a better man first." Naomi gently folded the certificate. Emily's final wish had been fulfilled. Her daughter would grow up surrounded by love. That weekend, Helen invited everyone to her house for dinner. Margaret came too, carrying her famous apple pie. The dining table was filled with laughter, stories, memories. At one point, Helen stood and gently tapped her glass. "I'd like to say something." Everyone grew quiet. She looked toward Lily, who sat happily in her high chair, making enthusiastic attempts to feed herself mashed sweet potatoes. "Emily once told me something during her pregnancy." Helen smiled through misty eyes. She said, "If my daughter is surrounded by kind people, she'll never truly be alone." Helen looked around the table. "I think she'd be very proud tonight." Silence settled over the room. Not an uncomfortable silence, a grateful one. Margaret quietly reached across the table and squeezed Naomi's hand. No words were needed. Family wasn't only the people we were born to. Sometimes it was the people who stayed. Later that evening, Naomi stepped onto the back porch for fresh air. The stars stretched across the sky. She heard the screen door open behind her. It was Carmen. "I've been waiting to talk to you." Naomi smiled. "I wondered when you'd corner me." Carmen laughed. "So, how's your heart?" Naomi looked toward the window where Ethan was making Lily laugh with ridiculous animal noises. "It's healing." "Healing or healed?" Naomi thought carefully before answering. "I don't think hearts heal the way broken bones do. They don't become exactly what they were before. They become stronger in different places." Carmen smiled proudly. "That's a very therapist answer." Naomi laughed. "I've been learning." "You've been growing." She nodded. "I think that's more important." Before everyone left, Ethan carried sleeping Lily to the car. Naomi tucked the little blanket around her. Lily never woke. As Ethan closed the car door, he glanced at Naomi. "You know." "What?" "I used to think family was something life gave you." He smiled. Now, I think it's something you build. Naomi slipped her hand into his. And keep building. Together, they drove home beneath a sky filled with stars, carrying not only a sleeping child, but the quiet certainty that love, when nurtured with honesty and patience, could grow into something even stronger than either of them had imagined. The first snow of the season arrived earlier than anyone expected. By sunrise, a soft blanket of white-covered rooftops, sidewalks, and the maple trees lining Ethan's street. Lily pressed both tiny hands against the living room window, completely fascinated. She had never seen snow before. Her wide eyes followed each falling snowflake, as if the sky were performing a magic trick just for her. Naomi laughed. I think we've created a new favorite season. Ethan smiled as he carried 2 mugs of hot chocolate into the living room. For us, maybe. He looked down at Lily. For her, everything is a favorite season. Naomi accepted one of the mugs. You know, I wish adults still looked at the world like that. Like what? As if every day had something new worth celebrating. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. Maybe we stop noticing because we're too busy worrying. Naomi looked out at the falling snow. Maybe. But children remind us to slow down. A few hours later, Margaret stopped by carrying a large storage box. I brought something. Ethan laughed. If it's more food, we're officially out of freezer space. It isn't food. She set the box on the coffee table. It's yours. Naomi lifted the lid. Inside were old family photo albums, Christmas ornaments, and several handwritten journals. Margaret smiled. I've been sorting through things. I thought Lily deserved to know where she came from. Naomi carefully opened the first album. The very first photograph showed a young Emily, no older than 5, standing in the middle of a snow-covered yard. Her cheeks were bright red from the cold. She wore mittens far too big for her tiny hands. Across the bottom of the picture, someone had written, Emily's first snow. Naomi smiled. She looks just like Lily. Margaret's eyes shimmered with tears. I think so too. As they continued looking through the albums, Lily crawled into Naomi's lap. She pointed enthusiastically at Emily's childhood pictures. Naomi gently kissed the top of her head. That's your mummy. Lily looked at the picture for several long seconds before touching it with one tiny finger. No one spoke. Some moments deserved silence. Margaret quietly wiped away a tear. I'm afraid she'll forget Emily. Naomi looked up immediately. She won't. How can you be sure? Because we'll keep telling her. We'll tell her how brave her mother was. How funny she was. How much she loved pancakes for dinner. Margaret laughed softly through her tears. And how she could never sing on key. Ethan joined in. That part definitely deserves preserving. The room filled with gentle laughter. Grief no longer felt like something to escape. It had become another way of remembering love. A week later, Naomi returned home after work to find a small package waiting on her front porch. There was no return address, only her name. Inside was a leather-bound journal. She frowned. Tucked inside the front cover was a handwritten note. For the children whose lives you change every day. Never forget that healing begins with people who choose to stay. Mrs. Evelyn Carter. Naomi smiled. Margaret. She immediately picked up the phone. You didn't have to do this. Margaret laughed. Oh, yes, I did. You spend your life helping other people heal. It's time you started writing down what you've learned. Naomi looked at the blank pages. I wouldn't know where to begin. Begin with the truth. What truth? Margaret answered gently. That pain can teach us compassion if we don't let it become bitterness. After the call ended, Naomi wrote her very first sentence. The people who hurt us should never be the people who define us. She stared at the words, then smiled. For years, her father had shaped every relationship she entered. Without realizing it, she had finally stopped giving him that power. 2 evenings later, Ethan and Naomi attended another counseling session. Near the end, their therapist asked them one final question. If another crisis entered your lives tomorrow, what would you do differently? Naomi answered first. I'd ask questions before making assumptions. Ethan nodded. And I'd tell the truth immediately. Even if I were afraid. The therapist smiled. Good. But I'd like each of you to go one step further. They waited. What have you learned about yourselves? Naomi thought for a long moment. I've learned that protecting my heart by expecting the worst doesn't actually protect me. It only keeps me lonely. Ethan spoke next. I've learned that carrying burdens alone isn't strength. It's fear wearing the mask of responsibility. The therapist nodded proudly. I think both of you are finally building a relationship between 2 adults. Not between two wounded children. The words settled quietly into their hearts. They understood exactly what she meant. Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snowfall. Helen hosted dinner one final time before officially moving to a smaller home closer to her grandchildren. The table overflowed with homemade food, laughter, and stories. Halfway through dinner, Helen raised her glass. I've watched this family lose. I've watched this family grieve. But tonight, she smiled toward Ethan, Naomi, Lily, and Margaret. I'm watching this family heal. Everyone quietly raised their glasses, not in celebration of perfection, but in gratitude for second chances. Later that night, Ethan and Naomi stood together on the back porch, while snowflakes drifted gently around them. The house behind them glowed with warmth and laughter. Lily slept peacefully inside. Naomi slipped her gloved hand into Ethan's. You know something? What? A few months ago, I thought that little girl was proof I'd lost everything. She looked through the window toward Lily's crib. Now I realize. She was the beginning of everything we were meant to become. Ethan smiled. I think Emily would like hearing that. Naomi nodded. So do I. They stood quietly beneath the falling snow. Neither knew exactly what the future would hold, but they no longer feared it, because they had learned that love isn't measured by the absence of hardship. It's measured by the courage to face hardship together. Spring arrived almost unnoticed. The snow melted into streams that fed the neighborhood ponds. Flower buds pushed through the once frozen soil, and the maple tree in Ethan's front yard grew a fresh canopy of bright green leaves. Life had found its rhythm again, not the rhythm Naomi and Ethan had imagined when they first became engaged. A better one. One built through honest conversations, shared responsibilities, and quiet acts of love that rarely made headlines but changed everything. Every Saturday morning, Ethan made pancakes while Lily sat in her high chair, enthusiastically helping by banging a wooden spoon against the tray. Every Sunday afternoon, Naomi read children's books to Lily before her nap, changing the voices for every animal until the little girl burst into laughter. Those ordinary routines slowly became their favorite memories, because ordinary days were where trust quietly lived. One sunny Saturday morning, Lily took her first unsteady steps. It happened so quickly that none of them expected it. Naomi was sitting on the living room rug stacking colorful blocks while Ethan adjusted the baby gate near the hallway. Lily stood beside the coffee table, holding on with one tiny hand. She looked toward Naomi, then toward Ethan. A determined expression crossed her little face. Without warning, she let go. One step, she wobbled. A second step, her arms stretched out for balance. A third, then she landed safely in Naomi's waiting arms. Naomi laughed so hard that tears filled her eyes. You did it! Ethan rushed over, grinning from ear to ear. Our girl is walking. Lily clapped for herself, completely delighted by the attention. Ethan picked her up and kissed her forehead. I think somebody just discovered she can reach even more trouble now. Naomi laughed. Oh, we're definitely in trouble. The three of them stood together in the middle of the living room, celebrating something that might have seemed small to anyone else. But moments like these reminded them that life wasn't measured only by major milestones. Sometimes the biggest victories came one tiny step at a time. A week later, Naomi found herself back at the bookstore where she and Ethan had first met. The same bell chimed above the door. The same wooden shelves lined the walls. Even the little cafe in the corner still served cinnamon rolls that were far too large for one person. She smiled as memories rushed back. Coffee criminal? She laughed quietly to herself. What? A familiar voice answered. She turned. Ethan stood near the entrance holding Lily, who was waving enthusiastically at everyone who walked past. You remembered? I was hoping you would. Naomi looked around. You planned this? I did. Should I be nervous? He smiled. No. You've had enough surprises for one lifetime. They wandered through the bookstore exactly as they had years earlier. This time, however, there was a little girl sitting happily on Ethan's shoulders, pointing excitedly at colorful picture books. Naomi picked one from the shelf. The family we build together. She showed it to Ethan. I think someone needs this. Lily immediately reached for it. I'll take that as her approval, Ethan laughed. They settled into two familiar chairs near the cafe window. Rain gently tapped against the glass outside. For a few minutes, none of them spoke. The peaceful silence reminded Naomi of the day they first met. Back then, they had been strangers learning each other's favorite books. Now, they were partners learning how to build a family. There was a time, Naomi said quietly, when I couldn't walk into this place without wondering if everything we'd built was over. Ethan reached across the table. And now? She looked at him with a calm smile. Now I realize something. What? The strongest memories aren't always the painful ones. They're the ones we choose to keep creating. Ethan nodded. I like that. So do I. That evening, they attended another session with their counselor. This one was different. Instead of discussing conflict, they reflected on growth. Their counselor smiled as she looked through her notes. When you first came to see me, both of you believed fear was protecting you. Naomi nodded. I remember. And now? Ethan answered first. Now I know fear isolates. Naomi continued. But honesty connects. The counselor closed her notebook. I don't think either of you came here to become perfect. No, Naomi said. We came here to become healthier. And that's exactly what you've done. Before they left, the counselor offered one final piece of advice. Relationships don't succeed because people stop making mistakes. They succeed because people create an environment where the truth is always safer than silence. Those words stayed with them long after they walked out of the office. The following weekend, Ethan invited Naomi to take a walk along the lakeside trail where he had proposed almost 2 years earlier. The path looked much the same. Wildflowers lined the edges. Gentle waves lapped against the shore. Birds circled overhead. Only one thing had changed. This time, Lily walked between them, holding one of Ethan's fingers with one hand and one of Naomi's with the other. Her tiny steps were slow, unsteady, determined. Naomi looked down at the little girl and smiled. She still needs us. Ethan looked at both of them. And I think we still need each other. Naomi didn't answer immediately. She simply squeezed his hand. Sometimes love didn't need dramatic declarations. Sometimes it sounded like quiet agreement. As they continued down the trail, Ethan glanced at Naomi. There is something I've been carrying. She raised an eyebrow playfully. You know we're not keeping secrets anymore. He laughed. No, we're definitely not. He reached into his jacket pocket. Naomi smiled. Oh. Yeah, I know that look. He nodded. So this time, I'm doing it the right way. Naomi's heart began to race. Not because she wondered what was coming, but because, for the first time in a very long while, she wasn't afraid of the answer. Ethan slowly lowered himself onto one knee. Not because tradition demanded it, because this time he wanted every word to be spoken with complete honesty. The breeze carried the scent of fresh wildflowers across the lakeside trail as Lily stood between them, still holding both of their hands. She looked from Ethan to Naomi with curious eyes, completely unaware that she was standing in the middle of one of the most important moments of their lives. Naomi felt tears gathering before Ethan had spoken a single word. He reached into his jacket pocket. Instead of opening the ring box immediately, he looked directly into her eyes. You know, he said softly, I used to think proposing meant asking someone to spend the rest of their life with you. He smiled. I don't think that's the hardest question anymore. Naomi's lips curved into a gentle smile. What is? The hardest question, his voice caught with emotion, is whether someone can trust you with their heart after you've broken it. A tear slipped down Naomi's cheek. Ethan continued, when I proposed the first time, I promised to love you forever. I meant every word. But I didn't understand something. He paused. Love isn't only about keeping the happy promises. It's also about telling the difficult truths. He looked down briefly before meeting her eyes again. You deserved honesty before certainty. You deserved a partner instead of a protector. You deserved to carry my burdens with me instead of watching me carry them alone. Naomi covered her mouth as tears flowed freely. I'm sorry for every moment my silence made you question your worth. I'm sorry for every night you cried while I convinced myself I was helping. And I'm grateful. He smiled through his own tears. That you gave me the chance to become a better man. Slowly, he opened the small velvet box. Inside rested the same engagement ring. He had never replaced it. He had simply waited until he believed he had earned the right to offer it again. Naomi Brooks. His voice was steady now. Will you marry me again? But this time. He glanced at Lily, who giggled as though she wanted to participate. Not just as the woman I love. He looked back at Naomi. As my best friend. My partner. My greatest teacher. And, if you're willing. He smiled at the little girl standing between them. The woman I hope will help me raise this incredible little person. For several seconds, Naomi couldn't speak. The wind gently stirred her curls. The lake shimmered behind them. Every painful memory she had carried, the image of her father leaving, the nursery window, the unopened message, the sleepless nights, passed quietly through her mind. But this time, those memories no longer stood at the center of her story. They had become chapters, not the ending. She stepped closer. I've spent most of my life believing love meant waiting for someone to leave. Her voice trembled. When I met you, I thought maybe I could unlearn that fear. She smiled sadly. When everything happened, I believed I had failed. Ethan gently shook his head. You didn't. We both got lost. Naomi nodded. We did. She reached down and took the ring box from his hands. But we also found something. What? A relationship that's stronger because it learned how to tell the truth. She looked into his eyes. I don't want the version of us that existed before. Ethan blinked in surprise. You don't? She smiled. No. Because those two people were still hiding behind fear. She slipped the ring onto her finger. I want this version. The one that knows healing takes work. The one that asks questions before making assumptions. The one that understands love isn't proven by perfection. It's proven by showing up. Day after day. Conversation after conversation. Choice after choice. She laughed softly through her tears. So yes, Ethan. I'll marry you. But only if we keep making one promise. What's that? She squeezed his hand. No more carrying heavy things alone. His eyes filled with tears. Never again. Lily clapped enthusiastically, delighted by the excitement around her. All three of them burst into laughter. 3 months later, the wedding wasn't extravagant. It wasn't held in a luxury ballroom or beneath glittering chandeliers. Instead, it took place in the botanical garden where Naomi and Ethan had begun rebuilding their relationship. The same flowers surrounded the ceremony. The same peaceful pond reflected the afternoon sunlight. Only now, every seat was filled by people who had walked beside them through heartbreak and healing. Helen sat in the front row, smiling through tears. Margaret held a handkerchief she had already used 3 times before the ceremony even began. Carmen grinned proudly from her seat. You'd better not make me cry before they say I do, she whispered to Margaret. Too late, Margaret replied, laughing. When the music began, everyone turned toward the garden path. Naomi appeared, radiant in a simple ivory gown. She wasn't walking alone. Her mother, Denise, walked proudly beside her. Halfway down the aisle, Denise squeezed her daughter's hand. I'm proud of the woman you've become. Naomi smiled. I learned from the best. As they reached the front, Denise kissed her forehead before taking her seat. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off Naomi. Not because of the dress, not because of the flowers, because the woman walking toward him had chosen courage over fear. And he knew how difficult that choice had been. Then came the smallest member of the wedding party, Lily. Wearing a tiny cream-colored dress and matching shoes, she toddled down the aisle holding a little basket of flower petals. She managed 3 careful steps before deciding the basket was far more interesting than scattering the petals. The guests laughed warmly. Naomi knelt and held out her arms. Lily ran the remaining few steps straight into them. The applause that followed was louder than anyone expected. The officiant smiled. I think that's the sweetest interruption I've ever witnessed. Everyone laughed. When it came time for the vows, Ethan spoke first. I promise that our home will always be a place where truth is welcome. I promise to speak even when the conversation is difficult. I promise never to mistake silence for strength again. Naomi wiped away tears before beginning her own vows. I promise to ask before assuming. I promise not to let yesterday's pain write tomorrow's story. I promise to love you with honesty, patience, and grace. And I promise that Lily will always know she was surrounded by love from the very beginning. Helen quietly whispered, Emily would have loved that. Margaret nodded through tears. She absolutely would. The officiant smiled at the couple. By the promises you've made and the love you've demonstrated, not only today but through every challenge you've overcome, it is my great honor to pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss. As Ethan and Naomi embraced, applause echoed through the garden. Lily clapped louder than anyone else. That evening, after the guests had gone home and the celebration had ended, Naomi and Ethan sat together on the porch while Lily slept peacefully inside. The stars stretched across the quiet sky. Naomi rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. Do you remember the message you sent me? He smiled. Please read this when you're ready. She nodded. I wasn't ready then. When did you become ready? She looked toward the softly lit nursery window. The day I realized love isn't about never facing heartbreak. It's about refusing to let heartbreak have the final word. Ethan kissed the top of her head. I think that's the most beautiful thing you've ever said. They sat together in comfortable silence. Not the silence that once separated them. The silence that exists between people who no longer have anything to hide. Inside the house, Lily stirred briefly before settling back to sleep. Naomi smiled. Our family. Ethan gently intertwined his fingers with hers. Our family. And in that quiet moment, they both understood the greatest lesson life had taught them. Sometimes the people we love are carrying burdens we cannot see. Sometimes our own fears tell stories that aren't true. But when honesty meets grace, when accountability meets forgiveness, and when love chooses truth over silence, broken hearts don't simply survive. They become places where hope learns to live again. As we come to the end of this unforgettable journey, I want to leave you with one question. What lesson touched your heart the most? Was it Naomi learning not to let her past define her future? Was it Ethan realizing that silence can sometimes hurt more than the truth? Or was it the reminder that family is built through love, sacrifice, honesty, and the courage to choose one another every single day? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely read your comments, and your story or perspective could encourage someone else who is struggling with trust, forgiveness, or healing. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful love story filled with hope, life lessons, and unforgettable endings. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with them. You never know whose heart it might help heal. Always remember, the deepest love isn't found in people who never make mistakes. It's found in people who choose honesty over silence, grace over pride, and each other over fear. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Whether you're a returning member of our family, or you're watching for the very first time, I'm truly grateful you're here. Until our next story, take care of yourself, take care of the people you love, and never stop believing that even broken hearts can find their way home. This is Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, where every story teaches a lesson, every ending brings hope, and every heartbeat has a story worth telling.